last week, there was this concern about Canada and Mexico, right? I mean, Trump kind of unleashed the tariffs on them. Markets got a bit upset. It was like, oh, see, Trump's just gonna, doesn't know what he's doing. He's gonna break NAFTA and everything's a disaster. And, there was a lot of complaining about tariffs and what they mean. And so I was just kind of thinking like, okay, is this a good idea? Why is he doing this? I mean, this guy has said that his favorite word in the English language is tariffs. So there are parts of Trump and what he's trying to do, or what he says he's trying to do, that would favor the middle class, the working man, over the wealthy. And he has policies in place that could transition us to that kind of future. One of the issues that we have here as a society is this short-termism and this idea that the financial markets and the stock market is a scorecard, and we have to just keep gunning for higher corporate profits, higher wealth for the 1%, and higher stock prices, as if that is the panacea for America. It's clearly not. It's obviously helping a lot of people, but it's increasingly helping less people. Tariffs are something that buys time. We kind of got into the concept of Bitcoin, right? I mean, the idea of time preference and high time preference and low time preference. I mean, our society is a high time preference society. I mean, the way that everyone's just focused on consumption, focused on tomorrow, focused on, and the way the media and corporations kind of facilitate that and kind of force everyone into that. And
that's by design. I mean, that's the way they want that. I mean, they want to debase the money.
I feel like our economy and our society is broken. We have record inequality. We have more wealth controlled by the top 3 people or the top 100 people than everybody else combined. I mean, and the gap has never been wider. And so what are we going to do to fix that? Or are we going to go into some violent, revolutionary fourth turning? And hopefully we don't get to that point. We need to buy time, right? We need to slow things down. We need to fix the economy in a lot of different ways. And it's going to take some time. It's going to take some pain. And, tariffs are a part of that. Not the only thing. Obviously, there's other things that are in the agenda that he's supporting, which I think are very interesting that can get us there. But this is a tool to help slow things down.
When you have a fire in your forest and you don't let the small fire come through and cleanse it out, like, you're going to have a great big fire and it's going to be really bad. It's going to be way worse, right? So Friedrich Hayek said that. It was like, don't do this. Don't do the Federal Reserve. You're not going to allow the natural cycle to cleanse itself. You're going to kick that can down the road. And then what did we have? The Great Depression, right? So he kind of called that and said it's going to be way worse. And then that Great Depression came after the Roaring 20s.
But this is what I see with tariffs. I see tariffs as a crony capitalistic measure.
Yeah.
Where you're centric planning the economy. You have Donald Trump or whoever in the regulatory agencies that says, oh no, we know better than letting the invisible hand of the market work and cleansing the forest in many ways.
On that, it's just a tool to use to get out of the hole, right? So I totally agree with the fact that everything you just said, that it's not free market and it's not the most effective long term, but it's kind of a short term gap to like rebalance stuff and then let it rip.
I like the idea of the national security element of like saying this is a critical industry, right? There are a couple things that are critical that we probably should say, hey, we need this to happen. We need to make some motive for this to be produced here. So to me, that makes sense, as the government's one job is national security, which is what I think their job should be, right?
But back to the criticism about the central bank. I mean, part of the problem is the Fed, right? And the Fed says it's not political, but it's entirely political because it never lets the market set the price of capital to then come in and force the government to think about balancing the budget or spending less, right? Every time the treasury market shows any bit of dysfunction, the Fed comes in and prints money. And so Congress and DC at large say, you know what, like, we have no risk of running up ridiculous deficits forever because the Fed has our back. And that's political, right? Because there are certain segments of the economy, asset owners, homeowners, banks, that really thrive and benefit from that environment. And then there are parts of the economy, the poor, renters, et cetera, that keep getting screwed by this.
Sounds like you're describing the Cantillon effect.
That's part of the issue with capitalism, but it's really this end the Fed kind of concept that gets tossed around in the Bitcoin community a little bit. I mean, like, there's a lot of legitimacy to it. It's been, we've been talking about it for, since its creation.
If you think about it, it just makes perfect sense. We don't centrally plan the price of eggs or milk or anything like that. So like, why the fuck would we do it for the most important thing in society, which is money itself? Welcome to The Runway, where we cover current events on crypto, Web3, politics, and technology. Today I'm joined by my buddy Danny, James, and Craig. Welcome to the pod, boys.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
What's going on?
So let's fire this up with Craig had a great post on X about tariffs, and I found it really interesting. So let's see if Paul can find that and pull that up.
I actually haven't seen it yet, so this is fun. I can
Ooh,
take
perfect.
this in live.
I was gonna say I haven't seen this either. So
Yeah, I just it came across my feed and I was reading like, wow, this is really interesting.
800,000
So-
other people have seen this, but
So we're gonna react in real time here, and I know James is he's not one of the cool kids, so he was on Facebook talking to Grandma and Mimo, and I saw him have a take on this on like tariffs and like very libertarian like take on it. I was like, all right, well this is interesting. Let's get these guys in a room and let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
So let me read this take. Hypothesis: tariffs are a tool to transition America back from its high time preference societal disaster to a more sustainable low time preference future. The U.S. economy and financial markets have increasingly become a high time preference disaster, focused incessantly on short term outcomes and profit maximization at the detriment of long term societal health and planning for the future. This feature has been exacerbated by grotesque fiat money printing from the U.S. government, running up continued monstrous deficits with no hopes of ending. This has been aided by the myopia of the Federal Reserve favoring asset owners, the wealthy, and the banks over all other constituent society. This has contributed to the worst inequality dynamics in this country's history, with an increasing number of citizens falling into the lower half of the K-shaped economy every day. You're gonna have to scroll down, Paul, so I can read more. But yeah, my first thought when I read that was like, what the fuck happened in 1971, where they like started all this bullshit, and you really just see that wealth inequality like explode as they totally detach from gold. That was like my first thought. Enter tariffs. This is a tool that the Trump administration will use to help transition the economy back from high time preference to low time preference. Will begin to turn back the wealth inequality dial in favor of the 99% over the 1%, and will help bring about structural change in America that will eventually lead us to a better place. It will help to bring jobs back to America and help to orchestrate in a better, more peaceful tomorrow that will benefit more than just the rich elites. Tariffs buy us some time to get things in order and restructure the economy and society back to a more sustainable one that works for all Americans. That's a good thing. We need some time. No one said that this would be easy, but Trump and team are at least going to try, and they are going to break a few things along the way, including some asset prices which frankly need to go lower in order to bring down inflation. Not everything is about the stock market. This is a way to reduce wealth inequality from Wall Street to Main Street, which is necessary to have a functioning society in the future. I wasn't sure if Trump was actually going to be the agent of change given how he ran the first term, but the folks around him this time around, Bessent, Amirin, Lutnick, Rubio, etc., seem to understand that this time has to be different. And so it will be, and it looks like it started this weekend. Thoughts? Wow, that's a lot. There's a lot
in there.
There's a lot in there. That's some good.
And again, that
interesting
was
stuff.
I think it was like Saturday morning,
Mhm.
about 8 a.m. I did tweet that from bed.
it's a very eloquent stream of consciousness.
It was that's what it was, and I think my Twitter feed. If you folks that follow me, I've been pretty critical of the Fed. I'm pretty critical of the Treasury. I've been pretty critical of the last administration, kind of what they did to run the economy hot, try to win an election, and a lot of things. And so there's a lot of that in there, which if you're a first time, observer of what I'm talking about, you're like, what is this guy even saying? But when I thought about it, I was like, I need to say something here that's interesting about tariffs, because if you remember on Thursday into Friday of last week, there was this concern about Canada and Mexico, right? I mean, Trump kind of unleashed the tariffs on them. Markets got a bit upset. Society got a bit upset. Mexico and Canada got a bit upset, and it was like, oh, see, Trump's just gonna, doesn't know what he's doing. He's gonna break NAFTA, and everything's a disaster. And there was a lot of complaining about tariffs and what they mean and the like. And so I was just kind of thinking, like, okay, is this a good idea? Why is he doing this? I mean, this guy has said that his favorite word in the English language is tariffs. So
he also said his favorite book was the Bible. So
right. No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. But look, I think there are parts of Trump and what he's trying to do, or what he says he's trying to do, that would favor the middle class, the working man, over the wealthy. And he has policies in place that could transition us to that kind of future. it's bizarre because he doesn't necessarily come across as that agent of change, right? He's a New York City real estate billionaire. He's now surrounded himself with billionaires. And so when you try to say, look, Trump's for the people, you kind of get looks like, dude, come on. Like, and look at what happened the first time. First time around, he said he was for the people, and he really wasn't in a lot of ways. And so, but look, I think, tariffs are something that buys time, right? And so it kind of the tweet kind of got into the concept of Bitcoin, right? I mean, the idea
Low
of time
preference and
of time preference and high time preference and low time preference. I mean, our society is it becomes such a high time preference society. I mean, the way that everyone's just focused on consumption, focused on tomorrow, focused on, and the way the media and corporations kind of facilitate that and kind of force everyone into that. And
That's by, I mean, that's by design. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the way they want that. I mean, they want to debase the money to, make that happen. That's John Maynard Keynes and
absolutely
a large part of that
and so
economic school of thought.
yeah. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like our economy and our society is broken. And I think, the wealth inequality is the biggest, a testament to that. I mean, we have record inequality. We have, more wealth controlled by, the top 3 people or the top 100 people than everybody else combined. I mean, and the gap has never been wider. And so what are we going to do to fix that? Or are we going to go into some violent, revolutionary fourth turning where the people finally rise up and kind of kick it over and hopefully we don't get to that point. So, my thought was this is we need to buy time, right? We need to slow things down and we need to fix the economy in a lot of different ways. And it's going to take some time. It's going to take some pain. And, tariffs are a part of that. The tweet comes across like tariffs is the only thing. Tariffs is not the only thing. Obviously, there's other things that are in the agenda that he's supporting, which I think are very interesting that can get us there. But this is a tool to help slow things down.
Did you watch that? I think it was Anthony Pompliano and Howard Lutnick podcast when they talked about.
I heard about it. I did not see it.
Definitely worth a watch. Super interesting. I've been going back and forth on this because I woke up and read your post, and then I woke up and read his post, and I was like, there's all these different ideas, and you study in school, it's like by the book, it's like, hey, this is bad for free trade, it's a bad thing. But then you see the way that this was wielded in practicality and reality. And it's like, hey, we wanted all these concessions and we made these tariff threats. It's a nonviolent threat, right? But it's like a legitimate, like, hey, we want you to stop the flow of X, Y, or Z or do whatever at the border.
Well, it's a tool. It's a tool in the arsenal, really. Looking at it even more broadly, look at the Mexico and Canada tariffs that were slapped down. The immediate response there was actually, it's rooted in economics, but the purpose of the tool and that use was, let's get the border nailed, right? And then you've got this horse trade where, okay, we're going to pause the tariffs and you're going to take action to, seal the border from your side of the border. And that's directly speaking, that's a non-economic outcome, but it's using an economic tool to drive, part of the larger agenda. So tariffs can be used in a variety of different ways. Just another tool in the tool belt.
Interesting way to think about it. No previous administration would be so brazen to just throw something out there without going through all these committees and doing all this stuff and carefully prepared and curated statements and, hey, we're gonna do this study that's gonna last 8 years, and then after 8 years we're gonna send a spokesperson out and we're gonna say it very nicely. So I think on that sense it's like, hey, it's nice to see some actual leadership. James, what do you got on all this, bro? Let's hear the contrarian take.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with Craig's description. The first part of the tweet, I mean, in terms of the Fed, the economy as it currently situated, I guess where I break down or where I divert from Craig's position would be the prescription that somehow tariffs are going to lead us to economic prosperity. I mean, just to give you the full rundown, I mean, I come from an Austro-libertarian background. I am not in any way, shape, or form economically trained. I'm not giving market advice or anything of the nature. That said, I do try to come from a more Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, Friedrich Hayek. Free market is the best solution for the most amount of people. And I think historically, if we look at 1776 was important in many different senses. One of which, obviously, that we all know, the American Revolution, which kicked off and took us from a monarchical form of government over to a Republican democratic style. But also, it was the same year that The Wealth of Nations, or A Theory into the Inquiry and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, was written by Adam Smith. And so this idea of tariffs is not a new idea. I
Mhm.
mean, this has been around for centuries.
Yeah.
I think what stuck with what Smith wrote was that showed that the free exchange of goods and the free exchange of ideas and the free exchange of commodities specifically, but services as well, benefits the economy and more so, I think, than central planning. And I think as
Mhm.
all of us, whether we consider ourselves conservative, libertarian, right leaning, whatever you want to say, I think that central planning is what got us in this mess and
Of
what's
course.
got monarchies in their mess and what got the Roman Empire in its mess. And so for that reason, I'm struggling to see how a tariff, even in the short term, is an economic solution. I see that might seem politically sexy, right? And
Mm.
just like you said, Trump didn't take 8 months to do this and consult advisors or whatever. He came out and said, "This is what we're doing, and this is how we're going to be moving forward." So I'm here to learn, and I'm here to kind of bounce ideas off you
So
guys and see how that goes.
So, when I listened to the Pomp Lutnick podcast, what I thought was really interesting was that after I think it was like World War II, where we rebuilt. I think we might have talked about this at one point, Danny, on a different pod.
We may have talked about it, and then I also watched part of that. So I
You
think I
did
know
watch
where
it
you're going. Yeah,
afterwards, yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
where I'm going was basically that like after World War II, we wanted to help rebuild those areas. So what we did was we allowed them to put all these tariffs on our goods and on our services and on our cars, etc. We wanted to help them, and obviously we were the superpower of the world. 70, 50, 60, 70 years later, here we are, and they still have 100%, tariffs on our cars, on our goods, on all their stuff, and we let them come into our markets for free. To me, that doesn't sound like reciprocity. So I guess what's the question? What's the game theory? If like you're being abused but with tariffs by another country, like wouldn't the goal be to try to be like, hey, like take your fucking tariffs off, or we're gonna fucking do the same shit to you? I don't know what maybe the worst case scenario is if both countries do that and they both have maximum tariffs, but maybe the threat of doing the tariffs will say, okay, if you don't do that, we will agree to lower our tariffs, and then at the end of the end solution is a better better trade and better prosperity for everybody, right?
Well, part of that too, like and I think they may have talked about this or I heard it somewhere, but so Europe and Japan are effectively decimated, after World War II. So our trade in that context was, we'll help you rebuild. We'll give you dollars. Now dollars are going to become the global, reserve currency. We're going to give you dollars. You're going to owe us all these dollars. So we basically, we, we, we gave them the money that they have to pay us back. We have all this, now this is where the start of all this debt comes in. We'll print more and more money to lend to our friends to rebuild the world, so you can go build stuff and then import it, right? That's when that's a big turning point in why we're significant net importers, with a lot of these, why we have these trade deficits, because going back to, we built the infrastructure, and in exchange we could run the debt machine forever. And now we've just gotten to a point where our debt, it's just gotten out of control. So tariffs, I see tariffs in this context as like a reshaping mechanism to kind of rebalance it a little bit, because economically speaking, the tariffs, if you can buy something for $1 from another country and it costs $1.10 to build it here, you put a 25% tariff, theoretically the market's going to come and buy that good that's $1.10, and in the short term that causes inflation. Goods cost more.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're trying to drive there is maybe these foreign countries will start manufacturing in the United States, creating more jobs here.
Yeah.
They'll get more scale. It'll ultimately drive the prices of goods down, but it'll create more jobs. It'll close that inequality gap, which I think you alluded to in your tweet, which is ultimately a low time preference good thing.
So I guess Bretton Woods aside, creation of the IMF aside, what we're talking about when we say tariffs, let's call it what it is. It's an import tax. All right. So what we're here doing is arguing for more taxes. And I heard, earlier you talking about, well, other countries are putting taxes on us or putting tariffs on us. So it would just be like, I'm so mad at Czechoslovakia for putting that tariff on us. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. That's really what a tariff ends up becoming, because now you're hurting the American consumer. And at the end of the day, I think that's what matters. It also ends up affecting the supply of whatever good or commodity that you're talking about. And again, I hear the political arguments. I'm still struggling to see how this is an economically sound argument.
So I think in actuality, if the tariffs are implemented, kind of what you're describing, the way I look at it is like, a game theory, right? Where it's like this game of chicken, where like, you know, you put your tariff, I put my tariff. That's like the worst case scenario. We all,
It's
chicken.
fighting fire with
You
fire.
die, right? But like, hey, like, you're putting a tariff and I'm not. That's like kind of not the optimal thing. And then like there's this other one where it's like I'm putting a tariff, but you're not, and that's kind of not the optimal, thing. But then like if we play this game of chicken, the optimal play is we both pull off at the last minute and then there's no tariffs. So that's the question is, can I threaten a tax at you
Sure, sure.
and to get you to remove your tax, which seems like Trump did have some success doing that,
Right,
like
so-
renegotiating deals, and he did succeed on that like the last time he was in power.
We're speaking in the realm of theory.
Uh-huh.
And so what you're saying is we have to disregard history for the better part of the last 3 centuries, seeing that what ends up happening when you place a tariff is a retaliatory tariff. And in the worst case, a world war.
Mhm.
And so I understand that he kicked the can down the road for 30 days, which is what's happened with both Canada and Mexico.
Mhm.
But I don't see this theory materializing.
I mean, from my perspective, what I'm saying is that the current system is completely broken, right? The petrodollar system is broken, and the U.S. as a global hegemonic currency issuer, that system is dead and needs to die. And so, we can't keep running trillion-dollar deficits, for the benefit of the rest of the world. We can't keep spending trillions of dollars a year on military to secure, naval sea lanes and the like. And so, and we also can't afford to do that because we're $36 trillion in debt and 125% of GDP. And it's just, it like that game is over. And there are people in DC and mostly outsiders who kind of recognize this, right? And so, how do we transition back to a multipolar world where the U.S. dollar is still important and the U.S. is still very powerful, but isn't a unipolar hegemon anymore? And how do we bring back manufacturing jobs, to America,
Because that's another
and
aspect of-
rebuild supply chains here? I mean, we're very,
There's a national security component of that too, as well. It's like,
for sure.
if you do get in a hot war somewhere, you don't produce anything.
Like, we were super exposed during COVID, right?
know.
I mean, I think that was an eye-opening experience, just how little manufacturing in medical, in pharmaceutical, and in critical goods that we don't do here. And so we need to do that here, but it's too expensive to do it here. So the only way to do it and bring those jobs back here is through protecting domestic industry through tariffs, and then eventually having a weaker currency. And so that's the ultimate end goal here, because the US dollar is just way overvalued versus every other currency in the world, because every other country stores their excess reserves in dollars, in treasuries, in US assets. And we don't tax them for that. We allow them to build these surpluses. They store them here. And who gets screwed? The American worker. And so for decades, that's been okay, and the stock market's done great, but more and more people have been getting screwed by this system. And Trump has kind of leaned into this. I don't know how he figured this out. It doesn't strike me, again, as the person who would have thought that.
I think this was Howard Lutnick and some of the other guys that.
But I think so. But he
Yes.
obviously has struck a nerve in the working with working folks, and so the only way to do this is to bring back those jobs is through breaking some eggs, right? And so this is really the one of the tools that he could use in order to help facilitate that. And so, yeah, look, it's not free trade, but we don't have free trade right now anyway. And so this is about kind of fixing the system at the benefit of the U.S., because right now the U.S. still does have a lot of power. But if we keep going down the path that we've been going on, we lose more power every day, right? China's becoming a larger trading partner with basically every other country in the world. And clearly in AI, in drone technology, and electric cars, like, they've caught up, if not surpassed us already. So we're increasingly losing that, that global manufacturing edge. And so, again, this is not the ideal solution, but we need major changes, and this is the way to kind of get things started.
What about exorbitant privilege? What about like just printing all this money so we can just give it out to all these scams?
No, look, I mean, it's
Hillary Clinton's daughter, Chelsea, doesn't get her $84 million a year through USAID, and then some of these people actually have to work. I mean, this is absurd. I mean,
and look, I think finally the American inflation in the 70s, post leaving the gold standard in 1971, and then how the war spending and the Great Society spending that kind of continued on through the mid 70s, and most Americans don't remember that, right? Or at least older people obviously do, but
most of us weren't born.
But most of us were, none of us at this table were born. I think I was born in '79, so I'm the oldest one here, I think, but I don't remember it. And so, what I was going to say is, I think folks in America now are understanding inflation, right? They're getting more familiar with that the game is up, right? The jig is up on money printing. They recognize that they were happy that they got money during COVID, but they're pissed that everything costs a shitload more.
I got my $1,200 check for
their wages
my rent doubled.
Their wages haven't kept up, and asset prices are out of control, and there's no ability, for them to really save. I mean, we can talk, obviously I'm sure we'll talk about Bitcoin and how that's been a blessing for them. But really, Americans realize, like, the game of money printing is kind of like the game's kind of over.
We agree. I think the four of us sitting here, I think we agree on way more than we're going to disagree about. And I sympathize with the lesser of evils in the tariff versus, even something like the income tax. The problem with the national security argument that I have is that the Trump administration, the Department of Defense, has line itemed 4,200 different commodities that potentially could lead to a national security concern, right? So now we're talking about, all right, so let's put a tariff on steel, right? Because we're going to need steel to mobilize during a time of war. All right, well, what do you need to make steel? You need oil, okay? Now there's a tariff on oil. What else do you need? You're going to need tariffs on any of those other 4,200 commodities. And so we're slippery slope argument, I understand, is a logical fallacy in many senses. Yeah. That is, unless the slope is slippery. And what we're dealing with here is we let one cat out of the bag. I think we're going to be dealing with a huge issue.
Yeah, so the argument that the administration will tell you, and I'm sympathetic to it, I don't know if I 100% agree, is that the reason tariffs are not inflationary is because consumers will be forced to reallocate their spending into ways, because they're not making more money, and so prices go up on certain goods, they don't go up on other goods. Consumers basically, I can't afford that, I spend less on that, I spend more on other things.
Right, but the invisible cost is also the employers. The employers are now going to have to make concessions in their day-to-day.
Sure.
Cutting jobs.
And look, and the question then is, like, corporate profitability and profit margins, and the share of income between corporates and labor is also record wide. And so again, this is about trying to enrich workers and trying to enrich the middle class. But it's weird to say, well, tariffs are gonna get you there. I understand that, but there's other parts of the administration with respect to deregulation and with respect to energy production, supply side reform, that they're trying to do in order to bring down inflation.
No, I hear you.
So this is yeah. But I mean, I just think without and the other thing too, which the administration is talking about, is kind of using the revenues from tariffs in order to help bring down the deficits, right? So it's all it all kind of there is a vision here, and if you kind of try to put pieces together, I think you can make the argument how this really does help us. But the problem is, then Trump comes out on Monday with the market kind of being down, and he's like, yeah, okay, cool, we'll make a 30-day deal, right? He delegitimized, and that's after I tweeted, so my tweet doesn't look as smart, but so he kind of delegitimizes, my view that he actually is focused on this grand realignment and restructuring global trade and rebalancing the economy. He
kept the tariffs on China.
But he did keep the tariffs on China.
If you're saying if we were going to abolish the income tax and replace it with tariffs, I'm on board. I hear you. 100%.
That's how I feel. I mean, I would love that.
If you look at the end of the 19th century, everybody always likes to put, oh, look at all the tariffs, look how they created all this wealth and prosperity. Yeah, there was no income tax.
Yeah.
The American worker was doing a lot better because they didn't have to give 30-40%.
Yeah, no doubt.
To the federal government.
No doubt.
Not to mention state taxes and local taxes.
That's a potential manifestation of the strategy. Is just the time game, and there's so much other shit in the diaper that it's not gonna. I mean, that is a panacea theoretical end goal that you could do that. It's just the beast is so much bigger now that it's super low time preference.
I hear you. I guess, again, I think what we're talking about is that we're trying to bite our nose to spite our face. I think that if we're talking about central planning of the economy, we can look back throughout American history. Trump obviously isn't the first one to think of tariffs. Obama was a big tariff guy. Bush was a tariff guy. In terms of it leading us to some sort of economic prosperity and leading to production and bringing back manufacturing jobs, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, we have no other choice, I guess.
Abolish the income tax. Abolish the income tax.
I mean, look,
the federal bureaucracy.
There's a reason why
It's happening.
Money overseas.
That is happening right now as we speak.
That I like.
Yeah, look, I think there's a reason why Trump is renaming that mountain Mount McKinley again. He has such affinity for McKinley because of this kind of using tariffs and having no income tax, and that I think he thinks that is some sort of reality that we could eventually get to. I don't necessarily think that's likely, but what he does want to do is he does want to orchestrate an extension of these tax cuts, and if he does that, we're going to put another $5 trillion of deficit and debt, or another $5 trillion of debt on the balance sheet. And so, yes, you could bring in the Doge committee to cut spending, but the problem with that is that most of the spending is on Social Security, Medicare, interest, defense, which Doge really has no ability to control. And so the amount of discretionary spending that Doge can actually come after is really not big enough. So if he wants to do these tax cuts, we need. And he doesn't want to blow the deficit up. Now you can say, well, let's just keep blowing the deficit up, and then we get back to the money printing, the inflation, what happens to the dollar, and the like. I don't think they want to go that route, and there's definitely people in the Republican Party that will not allow that, right? And the margin now that Trump has in Congress is much smaller than it was in 2016. So he has to placate the Tea Party. Freedom Caucus
Right.
Voters who have never voted for a debt ceiling increase before, right? And so we need a debt ceiling increase, to be voted on the next 60 days. And these guys have never voted for one. So basically, he has to figure out a way to come up with revenues or spending cuts to offset these tax cuts that he wants. So tariffs just seem like the most obvious way to get it. And look, one of the most bipartisan things we have in America is a hatred of China, for good or for bad, right? Both parties are not, both sides of the aisle are not happy with the way China engages in its economy, the way it engages in trade, the way it engages with the environment, and a variety of national security across the board. I mean, this is one of the rare things that we agree on both sides of the aisle, and so having tariffs against China just seems like the most the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
In order to get revenues, bring back jobs, improve the deficit, right? Theoretically, right? So and look, what I think what we're creating though is we may be sowing the seeds of our own destruction here because China owns a lot of treasuries, the global South owns a lot of treasuries, and
30% of the American consumer expenditure goes to China. I mean, everybody here loves Amazon, right?
Yeah. So this is the part about short-term pain for long-term gain, which I think is what we're all talking about. This is the time preference argument. And so I think we need it, right? I think we need that kind of reset. But that path is going to be arduous, right? And I don't know, again, I don't know if Trump is willing to go. I don't know if he's willing to actually deliver the pain he says it would be necessary in order to do it. Because really, part of the reason we have this inflation is because asset prices, the wealthy are killing it, right? And so the Fed, this is my criticism of the Fed, and I don't get too quirky about it, but raising rates has actually been, inflationary, right? Wealthy people who own a lot of assets are killing it. Homeowners are killing it.
We live in Naples,
right? And so the problem is the Fed raised rates in order to fight inflation. And what wound up happening is that it's led to the K-shaped part of this economy has gotten even worse. And so low income renters, middle class folks, are paying 25% or more on their credit cards, right? Mortgages are over 7%. And, folks just can't afford really to live. And the Fed kind of doesn't realize that basically what they've done is they've left too much liquidity in the economy because the Fed's balance sheet went up like a rocket ship during COVID and has barely, has really gone down more like a gradual speed. And it really hasn't withdrawn enough liquidity to remove the inflation. And so that's why we're stuck in the 3-4% on government statistics, and for everybody knows that those numbers are BS anyway. Inflation's higher than that.
I guess to summarize kind of where I'm coming from, I don't see a problem with a trade deficit. I don't see a problem with a trade deficit with China, Japan, Mexico. I mean, I have a trade deficit with my supermarket, right? I go there, I get goods, I give them money. Uh, they turn around and they put that money back into the economy. It's the same thing with China, right? We take goods at a low price for low wage workers, and we give them dollars. What do they do with those dollars? Best case scenario, they burn them, right? That would be great. But they don't. They turn around and they put it back into the economy. They exchange them for yuans, and that's the way the circle of the economy works, or the world economy anyway, from a macro level. And so this idea that, well, we're getting too much from China, we need to start producing it ourselves. I don't necessarily agree with that argument.
No, I was going to say, I mean, that's the issue. That's how the middle class has been hollowed out. There's just been the shift in manufacturing offshores. WTO entrance of China in 2001 and 2 decades of that has led to an opioid crisis. Has led to more folks who are relying on the state than ever. Right. It's led to long-term disability claims are as high as they've ever been, and so we're putting out more of our citizens into disarray. Right, homelessness and crime and a variety of other things, and so.
This is not just solely at the feet of the trade deficit with China.
No, I know, but
I think there does need to be a rebalancing of all of this. I mean, we do need to have some
so
domestic manufacturing. It's gotten so, again, COVID exposed this. We saw this. There is a national security element there that needs to be addressed.
Your point is
transitioning.
I think your point is valid, though, in the sense, like, we live in a global world. With now more than ever, we live in a global world, and in a free market global world, certain goods can be made better, faster, cheaper elsewhere, and that can benefit us. So I think looking at it in a black and white perspective, across the board is, like, it's just not a realistic way to look at it. But there are certain things that we can do, like energy, for example. We have a significant amount of energy resources domestically. We should have no reliance. We can have a surplus.
We
can have a massive surplus.
Last time Trump was in power, we did.
Correct. And
for the first time in a long time.
But if you think about it, if you're looking at it strictly from we need to make more money. That's the bottom line, because we're operating at a massive deficit and we're losing money, and that leads to a bad thing. So we can look internally and say, well, what are our resources that it's actually practical and logical that we can make better, faster, cheaper here, or that we have more of? And look at those as the pockets that can be practical revenue generators for our country, and realize that, like, China's going to be able to make toys better, right? Or maybe we specialize on high growth industries, chips, like, look at TSMC, that they're not a domestic, like, we got to kind of pick our battles a little bit and know that it's a number. If you start winning more battles, you can eventually win a war.
Yeah.
But tariffs aren't going to, we're not going to change the free market and just, like, logically people are going to pay way more. That will be detrimental.
To your point, we've transitioned, and I think this is a good thing. And this is what happens in a healthy economy. We've transitioned our low wage workforce and our manufacturing jobs from steel and textiles to now agriculture and organic chemicals. And that's one of the things that America is a great exporter of. And so when we look at just the way the American worker and the way the American economy is currently situated, I think that has to be that taken into account in order for us to know, okay, well, we're getting cars from Japan, we're getting cars from Indonesia. I have a buddy who owns one of the largest horse product manufacturing companies in the world. After 2016 and the first round of tariffs, he had to change his manufacturing from China to Bangladesh because of the tariffs. So it's not going, he didn't bring it back to America. It'd be suicide for his company to think he could do that. And now everything, at his warehouse, because he has one of the biggest warehouses in the state of Indiana, when his Bangladeshi executives were in to discuss what they were going to be producing for. And to see that the smart American businessman is going to transition from low wage in one country to low wage in another. We're never going to be able to stop that. And to think that we're going to be able to bring jobs to create toys or jobs to create hemp shirts back to America, I think that ship sailed.
Interesting take. How do you see it, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, America has become about 70% services-based economy, and so really our biggest export is dollars, right? I mean, we export dollars, and so
And we keep printing them.
and we keep printing them, and the issue is that we have an inflation problem in this country, and it's going to keep getting worse if we just allow those dollars to be exported and then reinvested back into America to buy our assets, as more and more people in the economy lose jobs, and because of manufacturing changes or low cost labor outside of America, and now from an AI perspective too, right? As AI starts to penetrate and starts to take jobs away from American citizens, so we need to start figuring out ways to protect America, right? I think Trump has this. I mean, the idea is kind of America first, America only, right? And I don't know if that's look, that's I think in a utopian world that we would prefer that not be the case, but that's not where we live, right?
Would you agree? Would you agree that, or would you disagree that the United States and the level of economic prosperity we've been able to achieve is because of free trade?
I would say in part, sure.
Okay.
I wouldn't say exclusively though.
Okay. No, I understand.
Yeah. I think, look, standard of living in this country has certainly benefited from global trade, right?
I mean,
and
free trade.
Yeah.
But I'd also say that money printing has done a lot of that work, and borrowing from the future, and the bills do, right? And we can see that because interest rates in America are high, right? The government's borrowing costs are higher than Europe's, higher than Japan's, higher than China's, basically higher than everywhere. And I can say, well, it's great. People really want to, invest in America and lend money to the U.S. government for 30 years at 4.75%, but that's expensive. And the only reason it's probably not higher is because we've been doing more borrowing in the front end of the curve than the long end of the curve. And if we actually tried to sell a lot of 30-year paper, the yields would be even higher. And what we're doing also is we're screwing over foreign holders of treasuries, right? Because with sanctions, and so demand for long end U.S. government debt is only going to go down over time.
I mean,
so
we've definitely seen that.
Mm-hmm.
China, a lot of our frenemies, as you would say, have pulled back. Buying that debt.
So like the bill is. I guess my point is, like, the bill is due, and we need to figure out a way to start paying for it. And part of that's going to be cutting government spending. Part of that's going to be, increasing government revenues. I think taxes on corporations are too low, frankly. I mean, taxes on, Apple and Mag 7 companies and making stuff overseas. And I think Trump, has talked about maybe normalizing the tax code. And so if you make things overseas, that's a higher tax rate. You make it here, it's a lower tax rate. I think that makes sense.
And that's practical, and it can be
I think
implemented and can be enforced and is logical and can get consensus to pass, actually.
Yeah.
And so we need to start doing things from a structural perspective to help, pay the bills, and then realize that more and more members of our society are going to be kind of cycling off employment over time, right? I mean, with AI, with reduction in the government, right? We're gonna have to find new places or new work for folks, or we're gonna have to put them on the government's balance sheet. And if we're gonna do that, then it's gonna be even more expensive. The deficit's gonna be even higher. And so we kind of need to get some religion on spending, on the deficits, and do it now from a position of power, than not. Because if we wait another 4 years, China will be even that much further ahead in a variety of other technologies and manufacturing. Russia has tons and tons Russia's basically been outproducing NATO in weapons, consistently now for the last 2.5 years, which is why Russia's basically winning this war against Ukraine, which is why, Ukraine's going to have to settle with Russia. And so, OPEC has its own, their oil, and their oil wealth. And so we need to figure out how we're gonna lead, or how we're gonna be part of whatever the multipolar world looks like in the future. And the big solution, I think, that folks in leadership need to come to realization, and some are, is that the U.S. can no longer act as a hegemon, and the dollar can no longer be the hegemonic currency. U.S. Treasuries can no longer be the neutral reserve asset of the world, and that's okay. And
Bitcoin fixes this.
I like that.
Yeah,
fixes.
look, I mean, that, that's
Smooth
there's definitely elements of Bitcoin game theory which I think are important to think about, and I think the administration, parts of the administration are thinking about that in a proper way, not in a there are some people in the administration who are thinking about this in a ridiculous way, but I think Bitcoin could be part of that, part of something. But gold certainly has withstood the test of time. And countries own a lot of gold, and so we could use gold as a again another transition mechanism to settle excess trade balances.
I'm gonna have Dominic Frisby in here in a couple days, and he's been talking about that for a long time, about how China has their long-term plan, and they've just been hoarding gold and loading up on gold in anticipation of exactly what we're talking about here, right? I mean, that's part of their plan. But I think it would be, how clever would it be to instead of gold, to turn Bitcoin into that, like take the majority of that? I mean,
Well, there's a little bit of a Bitcoin tangent, but if you think about not just Bitcoin and the game theory that comes on the back of the U.S. acquiring significant amounts of Bitcoin that would theoretically, catalyze other countries buying a lot of Bitcoin. You've got the whole energy piece of it. We have a lot of energy. We talk about this all the time with mining. Like, we've got resources. We can produce Bitcoin. We can print money to do it. So we talk about, okay, we can print money to buy Bitcoin. We can print money to go mine Bitcoin, energy is what ultimately enables at the core civilizations to innovate and move forward. So more energy, more innovation, more prosperity. If you think about it very simply, we have significant energy resources. We can turn that energy into Bitcoin, accumulate more Bitcoin, win that space race. That's not crazy talk. We have the ability to do that. And then by doing so, I'm now kind of in a Bitcoin mining tangent here, but what's really unique about Bitcoin mining is that Bitcoin miners are time and location independent energy buyers of last resort. So if we have a massive, flexible power load that is actionable and on the grid that we know can be consumed by our buyer of last resort, which is the United States mining Bitcoin, we're going to have a massive increase in the amount of energy that's available for whatever the hell else we want to do. And that will actually, more energy will bring, you'd be probably more astute to talk about this from like an economic cause and effect, but I think energy is a resource that we can leverage.
Oh, no doubt. I
mean,
and you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. But I mean,
we're both heavily involved in mining and the energy space. But yeah, I mean, for AI, for everything, I mean, look at China. I mean, they're like, this is us, and like we got all this woke stuff and all this other crap, and then China's just like, boom.
If we want to win
scaling
innovation, pick your battles, and it's going to be AI and it's going to be Bitcoin that's the next revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it all starts with the common denominator is energy, and we have a lot of energy resources.
I think Ascent said that in his confirmation hearing. It was like a banger of a clip. It was like, some very liberal senator tried to ask him something about like, oh, what are we doing with green energy with China? They're exceeding us or whatever. And he's just like, it's not a green energy thing. It's an energy thing.
Well,
like,
dude,
they just opened 50 new coal plants or whatever it is. Like,
it's an energy thing, yes, but also like the cheapest form of energy from a not transition. I mean, it's more expensive renewables, but it's free. The sun is free. The wind is free. The problem is there's a huge capex to go make that happen, and it's unreliable. Basically, it's intermittent
energy.
But this is actually a way to transition to more renewables as well. If you're increasing, like, you think about it, you need to have a reliable baseload to service the regular energy consumption. You can build all flexible energy on top of that. So, I mean, this is a backwards way to, like, Bitcoin mining, and now we're way out here in the ether, is actually a mechanism to transition towards more sustainable energy,
no doubt,
resources domestically,
which
is a good thing.
I just signed a thing with a company, a new startup that's doing small modular nuclear reactors. So they basically they approached me and it was like, hey, like, we're going to spin up a 5 megawatt, micro reactor in the next couple of years. Like, will you do a partnership with us if we provide the energy and sell it to you at a low rate? Like, will you buy it? I'm like, fuck yeah.
Exactly.
Let's partner up,
Yeah.
you set up your, and I told him where do you need it to be, sir? I said, well, anywhere the fuck you want to put it. Doesn't matter to me. I can move my containers of miners wherever, right?
Exactly.
To kind of
Um,
bring it full circle and to piggyback off that point, and even to piggyback off Craig's point, because again, I agree with 90% of what you're saying. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is what leads to a sound economy? What leads to a sound economy is people voting for the right things, right? And so those are the representatives. We need people to vote for those representatives, right? We need people to be informed. And so where does it all kind of dovetail back to? Education, right? And so educating people about Bitcoin, educating people about manufacturing, educating people in different areas of the economy, I think is going to be vital. And moving our education platforms. I think we've seen it during COVID. I think we've seen a transition with Montessori schools and charter schools and different curriculums. I think it's been a good thing for the American.
I mean, the public education system is doing us no favors. So, and they have a vested interest in teaching us certain things and looking at the world a certain way that may not necessarily be optimal for how the world is evolving and changing and the reality of the situation, right? A lot of it is propaganda.
Why is there no classes in elementary school about, how to work, mine Bitcoin from your phone? Why is there, these should be the things that should be being taught now. It's transitioning.
I mean, this gets back to the time preference thing again, right? It's education is the ultimate kind of low time preference, endeavor, right? And I think, one of the issues that we have here as a society is this short-termism and this idea that the financial markets and the stock market, is a scorecard, and we have to just keep gunning for higher corporate profits, higher wealth for the 1%, and higher stock prices, as if that is the panacea for America. And it's clearly not. It's obviously helping a lot of people, but it's increasingly helping less people. And over time, it's going to lead to an increasingly larger segment of the populace that's getting more and more screwed and more angry.
It's a French Revolution.
Right. And so, we need leaders to recognize that, to speak about it, to think about it, and then also not to be afraid that a risk asset price correction is the worst thing in the world, right? I mean, think about how expensive housing is right here, even right here in Naples, right? I mean, it's, I mean, I own a home, and would I be happy if the price of my home fell by 30%? No, but I have a mortgage that was locked in from a long time ago, and would it affect my life at all? No, right?
Yeah.
But lower housing prices would really actually help people out.
Yeah.
And so we could get, but part of that's going to be housing supply, right? We need proper legislation to do that, and I think the administration is thinking more about these supply side changes, but.
I mean, a huge part of that is the money that we have that's broken. I mean, that's the way I look at it is, people don't want to hold money that the government just continues to print and wastes on all sorts of bullshit propaganda, USAID this, USAID that, all this other crazy stuff that they're doing, right? Wars all over the world. And, that's the mandate that was given, right? That we don't want to be this, it's going to be a multipolar world, right? Like we're not the policemen of the world anymore. The American people don't want that. We don't want to be in a failed conflict over here and a failed conflict, 5 trillion, bunch of lives later, a bunch of people, Americans dead. And, $5 trillion later, we're pulling out 20 years later with nothing accomplished. You know what I mean? Like we don't want that anymore. And I think the people voted for that mandate. Like we don't want that. Right. So
this idea of low time preference, this idea of behavioral economics, I mean, this is not a new idea. I mean, this is just something that needs to be taught.
Yeah.
Something that people.
Well, I mean, did you read about? Did they teach you about Ludwig von Mises at school? Did you learn about Friedrich Hayek? Did they teach you about? I mean, in the public education system. Did you learn about any of those people?
No.
You learn about John Maynard Keynes, and that's about it. Right. And then they allow you to learn about Milton Friedman. They're like, okay, you can learn about Milton Friedman. He's okay because he wanted to. He believes in capitalism for everything except for the money, right? So like the money needs to be centrally controlled, right? We have to have the Federal Reserve. We have to control the money, which is like crazy to me.
Right. And that's one of the biggest errors of the Chicago School of Economics is the central planning.
But that's why that was why they were allowed to be able to put in the textbooks and all this other stuff is because, for all other goods, we have to have a capitalist free society. But for the most important good of all of society, the price of money, we have to centrally plan that.
It's
right?
so funny that I heard a story the other day that John Maynard Keynes was at a conference on economics, and he told a reporter, he goes, "It's funny, I was the only non-Keynesian in that room." And so to see how perverted Keynesian economics has become, it was never the idea of John Maynard Keynes to go the way it's gone.
Part of what he espoused kind of in 1944 at Bretton Woods was the Bancorp.
Bancorp,
right?
yeah.
It was kind of the original Bitcoin in a lot of ways, and it was this, an asset that would be, secured that, a multi-currency neutral reserve asset. And that's really, what we need. And so countries that have been storing excess wealth in dollars, we thought that was a good look. We went off the gold standard and we kind of created the petrodollar system in order to have petrodollars recycled back into America and keep interest rates low, keep inflation low. And then we created the Eurodollar system, and we've continued to create all these, systems to keep finding borrowers for U.S. Treasuries to help facilitate U.S. consumption in this high time preference world. Right. Everything. And so
I think that's why it was working when China was buying our bonds and stuff. It was
Right.
like, okay, we're gonna, you can keep selling your shitty little toys here, and we'll let all of our plebs buy it. But like when they stop, seriously,
and now
just saying,
yeah,
I mean,
and
it's
now,
the truth.
look, now that we're running $2 trillion a year deficits
Yeah.
at full employment, the rest of the world's like, the fuck are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
cut this, like cut it. You're crushing the value of money. You're creating inflation for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And not only that, but we're also expropriating reserves from Russia.
Yeah.
We're also trying to sanction our enemies, and even increasingly threatening to sanction our allies. Right? I mean, Colombia, the Colombia situation from a couple of weeks ago, like, all of a sudden, like we're threatening them with levies on their holdings of U.S. assets. And look, ultimately we may need to get there. But if you're a foreign government, you're like, yeah, I hear you, but maybe we should pull some money back.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's what's going to wind up
double-edged
happening.
sword.
Yeah.
Well, if you're
sanctions
China,
and stuff.
you're licking your lips at what you're seeing of like, okay, cool. Now I can go take over South and Central America. They could be my babies. Like they're on the teat of the United States to some degree, and we're gonna say,
Well, they
fuck
took
off.
over the Panama Canal,
Yeah,
apparently.
yeah, right.
I saw this thing. They were that Trump
But-
was all mad about it, and then like you go to the Panama Canal, and it's like everything's in Chinese on all the buildings. So he's like, "Hey, the Chinese are running the canal."
Yeah. No,
They're
but
like, "No!" And then you go there, it's like every single thing you see is like, it's not Spanish, it's all Chinese.
That's
So
a disaster.
they're like, "Oh, they're onto us," and I saw them with the paint. They had them on video. They're like painting over all the Chinese words and shit.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Well, but these allies, like they are allies,
Yeah.
and we disproportionately benefit, up to this point. To then, when you isolate all your allies, then you don't have any more allies. And you know who's going to come make them their allies, and then they'll disproportionately benefit, at least in the short term, from that, which disproportionately negatively impacts us.
Yeah.
China, right? They're ripe to go be the best friend of all these people that, look at BRICS, right? I mean, that's an example of like countries are rising up and saying, fuck you, America.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how it all plays out. I mean, I definitely see both sides. I mean,
Yeah.
some of these situations, like, again, from that Pomp Letnick podcast, I mean, there's some really, like, unbalanced arrangements that are existing. It's like NATO is a prime example. Like, we're paying majority of that security budget. We don't even live in fucking Europe. We're over here on the other side of the world. Why are you guys not following through on your obligations where you're supposed to put 2% of your spending into military to protect yourselves? Why are we carrying, like, why are we overpaying? And you guys are underpaying, and like what this defensive alliance was to protect Europe, like to protect everything that's happening over there. Like, why are we? So I get where Trump is coming from on a lot of this shit. Like, it makes a lot of fucking sense, and just nobody has any, like, none of these other politicians have had the balls or any idea to actually say, hey, like, we're over fulfilling our obligations, and you guys aren't. So, I think I'm okay with some rebalancing here. Let's figure out where the pain points are. Let's try to get more reciprocity, and maybe asking nicely doesn't always work. So
Totally.
hey, we're using tariffs or whatever we got to do to get the desired outcome. I don't know.
No, I mean small wins. We kind of saw 3 small wins in this example with Colombia, Mexico, and Canada.
Yeah.
Those examples of just saying, you're like, we're going to play a little bit more hardball.
Yeah.
And that was like over a weekend. And
Yeah.
there was a capitulation of sorts.
There was
and
definitely a
again, it's that
capitulation.
idea of like win battles,
Mhm.
you win a war. But in this example, you don't necessarily want to win the war. You just want to get the rebalance. That's what we're seeking.
And I think that's what we're seeing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, to James's point, if the tariffs do come into effect, it's probably worse for everybody. But if they capitulate and we get a better deal for America, I think it's actually probably a good strategy.
A big if. That's a big if. And what we're talking about is alienating our allies and placing a tariff on Canada and placing a tariff on Mexico, placing a tariff on Colombia. I mean, what you're going to end up, historically speaking, what you're going to end up with is a retaliatory tariff. And then who are they going to go to? You're 100% right. They're going to start siding with Iran and siding with China and siding with Russia. And I just don't see how this turns out good for us.
It's just it's
He's 3
master
for 3 right now, though.
negotiation.
Yeah,
It's
he's
master
3 for 3 right
negotiation
now.
because like you got to apply a little bit of pain and see how much pain you can apply without getting the break.
Yeah.
The break in this
The break is
example is they
if you
say
get the break,
fuck
then you're
you,
right.
like we're best buddies with Iran and Russia and so on and so forth. That's unrealistic in the short term, but who knows where it could go. So,
Yeah.
but we do need to rebalance for certain, and
Mhm.
it's working right now in a microcosm. And we've got a lot of tools. We've got a lot of might right now. And one
Yeah.
thing Trump is showing is like, I'm not afraid to throw around the power of the United States
It seems that way.
use leverage to get incremental wins. It's just a matter of like, well, when does it stop? What's the breaking point? And it's just master negotiation.
Not to be too controversial, but if we want to,
No, be controversial, man. Say what you got.
Be extra controversial.
If we want an American example, if we want something that's in our own history, that's not too far long ago, I mean, we could just look at the 40 years leading up to the Civil War.
Get up to that mic, big boy.
Sorry, I keep leaning back. I mean, the 40 years leading up to the Civil War, the excise taxes or tariffs that were on the South from the North, which was the industrial center who had a lot of might, was, in my estimation, the reason for the Civil War.
It's not, what's so funny is that Dominic Frisby wrote one of my favorite books. He's one of my favorite authors, and he's going to be here literally next week. We're doing a whole series on his podcast, which is called Daylight Robbery. And one of the chapters is exactly about that. And they don't teach you that in school. In school, it's like, oh, it was to free the slaves.
Right.
But like, Abraham Lincoln was like,
preserve
he
the Union,
won, he
yeah.
literally won his election. I mean, at first I was like, oh no, this can't be true. This can't be true. I want to talk to Dominic about this. But like in the book, he has like a quote from Lincoln, and it's like, I'm not going to free the slaves. Like it's more so like this or that or the other. Like that's how he got elected, like by basically just kind of like being a politician essentially. And it's like that's kind of like the rainbows and ponies explanation that they give you in school. Like it's all about this, but at the end of the day, it's about the tax.
But those tariffs against your allies were exactly what led up to the death of 300 and whatever 20,000 people.
Yeah, no doubt.
In your backyard.
No doubt about it. So yeah, that's going to be a great series. I can't wait to dive into that. But
yeah, I mean,
you just hit the nail on the head there with that. The question is, like you said, they were implemented, they went into effect. So the question is, if you can get the results without actually implementing, which is what I'm saying, is like using it as this negotiating tool, like, oh, fucking Orange Man's crazy. He might actually do this. You know what I mean? Like, and he does have that, like, that's the way the world thinks of him. Like, this fucking guy's nuts, like, which is the Mad Max game.
I was going to say, there's definitely folks out who talk about this, the fourth turning and where we are and are we headed for one, a violent one or a peaceful one? And for the most part, fourth turnings have turned with violence.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss to say this time's probably not different. I mean, we have this record in wealth inequality in America. We have these various powder kegs globally, in a variety of different regions, whether it's China, Taiwan, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Russia and Ukraine. I mean, like there's potential for even larger sets of violence, than not. And so I think we're headed for that turning. Trump is leading us there. And whereas before with the prior administration or the path that we were on, I'm pretty sure we would have gotten there as well. And it probably would have assured a violent fourth turning. I think there's more of a chance now that it won't be because he's willing to kind of break some eggs, like I said earlier. But in the end, it may ultimately, we may get to the same exact place. And that's unfortunate, but I mean, history, repeats, right? So
there's a great quote attributed to Einstein where they asked him, what weapons are going to be used to fight World War III? And he said, I don't know what weapons are going to be used to fight World War III, but I can assure you World War IV will be fought with sticks and rocks.
Interesting.
And so, again, you guys are rolling the dice here with, well, let's hope this is a negotiation tactic and doesn't have it end up blowing back. It's the same way that when we entered the Middle East, we thought it was going to be, we just got to kill the terrorists. What we saw was blowback.
But to your point,
one dead terrorist, we created.
I like how Trump killed the terrorists last week. He just instead of mobilizing $2 trillion and bringing all of our soldiers on the ground and all this stuff, he just said hey, look, you're in this little cave. We're going to send this little missile, and we're not going to kill any civilians, and boop, boop, you're gone. He even posted it on his fucking his Truth Social account. He posted the little video. It's just they got the little cave in the mountains, and he's like, "Hey, we located all these little ISIS guys here, and boop, boop, gone." It was like when he walked into that negotiation with the Taliban guy. It was like he shows him a picture of his house. I mean, that's fucking savage. I don't care what your political beliefs are. That's fucking savage.
Well, dude, there's we talked about it a little bit last time, but maybe counterpoint to like how can you control the breaking point? You can control the breaking point by continuing to have transparent dialogue with those who you're, kind of trying to like nuke metaphorically. So even if you look at it with our friends, Mexico and Canada, right? We came out and we, bashed the stick, and then we said, okay, let's talk about it. Right. And if you put that on a larger scale, Trump has shown that he's willing to talk to North Korea,
Anybody,
that he's willing to
negotiate.
And like, when is it bad to have dialogue?
I
right.
totally
And
agree
if
with
you're
you.
having dialogue, you're less likely over enough, statistical runs of this to hit that fourth turning. So like, yeah, if Trump people, go on Trump, you're boys with Putin, your boy, like, dude, we want to talk to these people
just
because
we're talking doesn't mean they're necessarily best friends.
Yeah, and
let's have dialogue. There's
look-
millions of lives on the line.
Look at the United Kingdom and France historically. They've been at each other's throats for many years, and they've been best friends. They've been at each other's throats. Like, dialogue keeps it going. So you can apply a lot of pressure so long as you're willing to come to the table and not stonewall it. It's like sending emails. Like, sometimes you pick up the phone and you just have a conversation. You're like, I'm negotiating something, and maybe that came off a little rough. We did this recently, actually. We said, let's just fucking pick up the phone and have a call. And then it's like, oh, okay, the context here is important, that we don't want mutually assured destruction. As long as you're interacting with a like reasonable counterparty that does not, and reasonable, the definition of reasonable is I don't want mutually assured destruction. I'm not like trying to blow everything up. Then dialogue is good.
I agree.
So I think it's a control mechanism that we have in using like tariffs, for example, as a weapon of sorts.
As somebody who has a brother in the SEAL teams, like those guys are ready to roll. And I, coming from my lawyer background, I always try to negotiate first. And so exhaust all negotiations is my name of the game. And so if Trump can do that, I fully support it.
I mean, history seems to show us that what he just did has worked, at least for now. I mean, these three situations with Colombia and the other, they didn't want to take their drug dealers back or whatever it was, or their murderers back on the plane. And
well, how does
we'll send our plane to pick them up? He said,
and he said, okay, yeah, let him in.
Yeah, we'll take him back now.
Yeah,
you know what? We're gonna send our own plane to pick him up.
Carrot and the stick.
Yeah, it's like
you use the stick, and then you
but maybe there is a way to get an outcome that is better for both sides, right? Like, from a lot of this, like, I know it's like Trump's kind of like getting his way right now with certain things, where it's like, hey, they are folding and doing what he wants, but like maybe there's a way where it's like, hey, maybe we're doing something that you don't like, hey, we can fix that. Maybe you got a big old tax on our maple syrup up in Canada. Why don't you knock that tariff down a bit, and we'll knock our other tariffs down?
And you know what Canada has a ton of? Natural resources, right? There's like middle ground right there. Bang. You can find this stuff through dialogue. It's just trading. Everybody has something that somebody else wants, and if you talk through it, you can get there.
Free trade.
Yeah, I like that. Touche. All right. Wow, we've had a fantastic talk so far on just this, but Paul, why don't you put up some takes? And I don't think we're going to get through all 120 of them. We spent about a really long time on just one.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get it rolling.
Let's get a couple takes.
So
let's get some reactions here.
We've got quite the lineup here.
Let's see.
So we left off with Craig Shapiro's tweet, which was a fantastic take on tariffs. Got quite the reach, and I think y'all did it justice.
Well, I hope we did. We just raised some different thoughts.
So we've got some political takes. I'm gonna let you decide which one you want to go in on.
You're going a little too fast for me, big dog. I can't read any of those. You're just fucking going by. Start on the first one and just put her up.
So we've got DC Drano here.
All right. What's crazy is that the 2026 midterms are entirely in Trump's control. If he unleashes the FBI and DOJ on election fraud in blue cities, he'll win even bigger majorities in the House and Senate. If he doesn't, he'll lose Congress, get impeached at least one more time, and have a rough 2 years. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think there's tremendous fraud happening all over the place. Despite what the mainstream media tries to tell you. So what do you guys think about this?
I'm not that this is in the realm of conspiracy theories, but I mean, look, I think this is something that I think a lot of people just don't want to think about, don't want to talk about. They want to vote for an administration and politicians who they feel like are doing things the right way. I don't think people want to get rehash the 2020 election and the election fraud, and I think people are trying to move on, from this. And so, but I do agree Trump is in control of the 2022 midterms, and I think he's in control of them because he has policies in that he can enact between now and then that have the economy moving in the right direction, that have put people back to work, that has slayed inflation, and momentum on that front is going to be what brings him more power in 2026. And so, the question is, how quickly does he get on the path to doing that? And can he tolerate some of the pain short term and early in the administration that will allow those things to get through? And because if you take some pain early, you can blame the prior administration for the issues, right? You can blame Biden, you can blame Janet Yellen, you can blame the Fed for, the short-term recession or the stock market coming in, and that ultimately gets you the things that you need in order to have the economy humming in the summer of 2026.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And if you don't do that, then you run the risk. Let's say he tries to run things hot and he never lets the economy correct, and we're going to have an inflation problem again at the end of this year and early part of 2026. And then he's going to lose the House, and he's going to lose seats in the Senate. He's going to get impeached again. And then there's going to be no momentum. There's going to be no momentum for 2028. And so then he blows the whole thing that he's trying to do. So I don't know. It seems like there's a window here where any pain that comes to the economy, comes to markets, can easily be blamed on the prior administration. And having that pain increases the likelihood that you get what you want in negotiations with House Republicans, with Senate Democrats, with China, with everybody else, because everyone else is suffering from a similar type of pain. Doing it now puts him in control. He runs the risk, if he doesn't do it, that Republicans get booted in 2026 and JD Vance does not the president in 2028. And then that's a problem.
I have the luxury of being an MPA, non-party affiliated. And so when I see something like this, politics aside, I think historically speaking, government grows statistically at the lowest rate when we have a Republican president and a democratically controlled Congress. So turning it blue doesn't necessarily scare me. I think that having a little bit.
You're saying it grows at the best rate or the lowest?
No,
rate?
the lowest rate.
Like government,
government grows at the lowest rate.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I don't know if I misspoke there. So a blue Congress doesn't really scare me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should let it work, let the system work the way it was intended by the founders.
Separation of power, all this kind of stuff.
Which, you'll have.
I think with what's happening with those, this is going to be an anomaly. I think they're going to slash some serious shit.
The slower government grows, the better it is, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with you, man.
I don't really have much to say about.
I agree. I mean, he controls his destiny. He's the president right now. The best tryout for your next run is what you do right now, and there's plenty of runway.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to just close with my thoughts, having watched everything kind of transpire and occur in these different election cycles and really going down those rabbit holes. I believe that, we should have election day and maybe election night. But when you watch elections go on for weeks and weeks after an election and, people coming in at 4:00 in the morning and swing state cities are still holding out the votes, I mean, it just really makes you upset with the system. So I think I ultimately want to see some deep forensic analysis studies, et cetera, done on these things. I want to see these ballots that they're fighting so hard not to have people come in and actually look at. I want to see some actual evidence and whether there was fraud or not. I strongly believe with all my heart that there was massive fraud, but if there wasn't, I want to see the forensics behind it, and I want to see it, put to the light, which I think is what America is thinking.
That's not unreasonable.
With everything, with the CIA, with the FBI, with the Kennedy assassination, all these different things, aliens, whatever. People just want to fucking know. We want, there's a reason that we are private citizens, and there's they're public servants. I mean, we want to know what the fuck's going on. We want to know where our money's spent. We want to know, what the public, bureaucracy knows. I mean, that's like, we should get to know. So I think people, whether we're being visited by aliens, whatever's happening, like, we can handle it. We're fucking all adults, we can handle it, right?
Well,
so
I mean,
that's kind of my
you're
thought.
looking for an American glasnost. That's what you're asking for, which is, that didn't serve the Soviet Union well. When they truth told everything about, I mean, it basically broke the whole thing down, right? And so I don't know. Can this country handle the truth?
I think we can.
I don't know.
It's a very fair point.
I don't know. I'm open to think. I want to know the truth.
Yeah.
I think everyone on this table wants to know the truth.
Yeah.
But will society, will society handle when it learns more about the COVID vaccine and the truth behind it, and the cancer rates that are accelerating.
Yeah, we're gonna see that.
And so I am a little bit concerned. I mean, look, I think RFK will be an interesting choice, assuming he gets through. Kind of shedding light on the truth in pharma, in food, and in other areas. But is this country ready for that? Are the elites and the control and the power structures in media ready for the truth? And I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting.
Well, when a lot of people think when you pull back the curtain, you're going to see a boogeyman. You're going to see this conglomerate of these complex ideas and conspiracies and everything else. What I think, if you pull back the curtain on the United States federal government, is what you're going to see: competency.
So like I would have, I think there's definitely going to be a lot of that, but like, you know, I've been on X active the past week, and like like Elon and Doge are like blowing the lid off shit. Like they have got the data, they're showing the connections to different people and where all this, you know, donation and aid money's going. And, you know, oh, this is, you know, like I said earlier, Hillary Clinton's daughter is getting 84 million in this foundation. Like, you know, where's all this money going? What's happening? I mean, this is massive grift and fraud is what's literally happening. I mean, they're funding, I think, one of these takes I saw was like it shows like mass manipulation or something, like to Thomson Reuters, who's a news agency. I don't know if you can find that one, Paul.
There is a slight difference between like mitigating the problem and having everybody know what the problem was and that it is mitigated, or even forget that there was a problem.
Yeah.
Because of the point of like, I'm just trying to be devil's advocate here, kind of along the lines of what you said, like, fixing the problems are the most important thing. The second most important thing is making everybody aware of the problem.
Yeah.
Can people handle? Can everybody in this country handle?
I think everyone's kind of already known what's been going on, but like just to be able to see it out there. Yeah, what's going on?
I don't know.
It's the post you were referring to.
So like 48 vCPUs. So they were just trying to, you know, crunch all these numbers and figure out where's all this money going. So this guy's amazing. This data Republican, small, I think he says small r on his thing. But like the USAID grant thing is like wild, where all of our tax dollars are going to, you know, fund all these psyops and, you know, cause regime change, and to all of these different people in office who are like have 80, their net worth is like $100 million, but the annual salary is like 200K. Like
Nancy Pelosi,
like she should lead our fucking sovereign wealth fund. I saw someone fucking
Then we get
comment on that. It's like, and everyone was like, holy shit, that's actually a good idea.
Right.
Like she really fucking should. But basically they're like going through, digging through all the data and finding, you know, where all this money's going. And like this guy's been putting this out like every day, like just different things of like showing like all these senators, and like they've got their little pet foundation and it's getting like $100 million. I think they did like Chuck Schumer and all these guys, and like these guys, it's wild. You know, but they're actually digging into it. So kind of interesting.
I want to play you this short clip from a post that Dave Smith put out just on this subject of transparency.
Love
and
my
of
boy Dave.
There's Chelsea Clinton right there.
awesome USAID, right? The whole paradigm shift that we're experiencing. Essentially, the tables have been turned, and that's what Nicole Shanahan was telling him. If this will ever load.
Well, if we didn't have 5 million tabs open, it might load. But
Goodness, I had it pulled up here. It's just it's lost in the shuffle.
yeah. So why did USAID give 68 million?
All right, here we go.
Dave Smith is a national treasure.
Times committed against the American people from these power centers, that now you have
This clip, were you able to hear that?
powerful people who are really, and I must say, probably legitimately scared to death that somebody might open the books and expose what they've been doing to the American people. That's one of these things that's tough to brush aside.
Yeah, I mean, look at just the news today. USAID, hey, funded bioweapons research, gain of function research, links to COVID origins. You know, it is incredible that we now have the ability to data mine the government. Yeah, they've been data mining us mercilessly for years and years and years against our very liberties. They've been mining us, and the tables are flipped.
There have been
she hits
such
a nail on the head.
crimes committed against the American.
I mean, that like it's like it's way worse than you thought it was. Like then we all kind of knew that there were the corruption and the grift and how they were doing it, but they're like literally taking taxpayer dollars, giving it to media organizations to censor what they don't want. I mean, this shit is unbelievably like corrupt and obviously blatantly unconstitutional. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these people should probably. I know this is a radical thing to say, but like these people, like I think a lot of them need to go to jail or like something more serious. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I think that maybe there's some fear from maybe some on the left that Trump and the Justice Department will use this as a way to just really come after his political opponents, right? And just the grift and the stealing on the left. I gotta imagine that there is a similar amount of fraud and grift coming from folks who are in positions of power on the right as well.
Yeah, I mean,
and so
the small Republican did one on.
Yeah, and so as long as there's an equal an equal playing field here about who we're coming after on this, I think that is the right thing to do. I'm concerned that just given who Trump is and given kind of how he deals with political opponents, it's going to be a little bit more partisan, and then it kind of adds, it puts a little bit of a stain on what he's trying to do, and then you kind of start worrying about, how much power does he have, and we joked earlier, is he going to run for a third term, right? And then we start to talk about these types of things, and they get romanced in far right media those ideas wind up bubbling up, and then we're talking about things that are kind of unnecessary. But
and then you set the precedent, right, for who comes in 2020.
I mean, the precedent's been set. They literally went through the former first lady's underwear drawer, raided his place with shit that they knew he already had that he was storing down there because he had been in communication with them about it for forever. They funneled money to all these fucking clowns that were suing him. Like they took people from their administration and the Department of Justice, put them in like, hey, you go to the New York district, you go to Washington, D.C., which is like vote 98% Democrat, like New York City, like 98% Democrat, like Fulton County, Georgia was the other one where they're like 93% Democrat. Right. You know what I mean? It's like hyper partisan, total corruption, going after your political opponent who's literally leading you in the thing. I mean, like the precedent has been set. They try to throw him in jail for like hundreds of years with some of these charges. I mean, he's obviously got his flaws and his problems, and he probably screwed that fucking Stormy Daniels chick or whatever. But I mean, like,
I don't even think he's debating that.
Well, I think he is. He's like, I don't know.
It's just how he paid her.
It was just the funds and the legality of the flow of funds. They banged, that's for sure.
It probably happened. Yeah. I don't know, but all I'm saying is like, they changed the statute of limitation laws in New York to go after him for a crime that was, they got the civil lawsuit with this woman who's living in the woods, who's clearly mentally ill, trying to, he got me in a room and 40 years ago, and you're in a hyper partisan like jury where there's like 98% everybody thinks the same way. I mean, like to me, that's just totally corrupt, totally crazy. So that precedent has been set, right? Like that's my thought. Like, so yeah, we need to break that precedent. Absolutely.
Well, it takes a strong leader to be able to be like, you did this to me, but I'm not going to do it to you. I'm going to be the bigger man in this case.
It reminds me
I'm going to do it to you, but I'm going to do it to the people who I'm going to do it to the me as well kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, Trump pisses so many people off because of what he says, but he doesn't actually do half the shit he says. I mean, he's like a reality TV star. He's like, comedian kind of guy. And it just people aren't used to that in politics. So it just rubs people the wrong way. I remember when he said like he had that banger in Hillary Clinton, I think it was like 2016 or whatever. She said something like that, and he goes, well, if you were in power, blah blah blah, like I would never do this, and he said something like, oh, that's because you'd be in prison. Like everybody laughed, like I clearly won the debate, like it was a mic drop, like you know what I mean, like but we all laughed because we're like, of course he's not going to put his political opponent in prison, and then like 4 years he didn't do that. He could have, but he didn't when he had power, and then 4 years later, that's exactly what they're trying to do to him. I mean, that's wild, in my mind, I thought it was very wild. So, I was kind of like, to me, this election was probably one of the most consequential ones I've ever felt in my life. Obviously, because the previous administration has been prosecuting our industry with the choke point, the SEC, all this type of shit. So there was that element of it. Then there was the blatant, in my mind, total corruption going after political opponents, Banana Republic type shit. So yeah, I mean, for me, I really fucking felt this one. I was like,
I got a
orange.
question.
We got to get the orange man back.
I got a question for the three of you because I mean there was a question about election fraud earlier. In the sense that Trump came back and won handily, in 2024.
Yeah.
Did that do anything to kind of quell your concerns about election fraud? Do you think it was just
Absolutely not. I think he just ran up. Pennsylvania, they were already trying to do it in like some of these. I was watching. I wasn't going to go to sleep because I remember being on like the betting site the night that he in 2020, and like he was at 99% on all the Vegas betting sites because it was like there's no way. Like they went on and there wasn't enough votes left in Georgia for him to lose Georgia. Like one of the guys was on TV saying that like, yeah, we're gonna wrap up soon. There's only a couple 100,000 votes left, and Trump was up by over that margin. So it was like even if all those votes went for the other candidate, he couldn't have won. And then just watching this whole thing play out over weeks of like, oh, we're still counting, and oh, the people coming in at 4 a.m. and blocking the windows and all this crazy shit that was happening, all of the mail-in ballot fraud. They caught these fuckers the last day in Pennsylvania trying to stuff 6,000 fake ballots in. This far left organization that did it. Out of Arizona. I went down this fucking rabbit hole, dude. And the more I went down this fucking rabbit hole, I was like, oh my God, this shit is fucking crazy what they're doing. And they're getting away with it. No one, who's going to stop you? You run an election once every 4 years. It's all over the place.
My question though would be, why is it that not one circuit court judge has found anything where they've been able
no
to
standing.
prosecute
No standing. They're kicking the can. There's a guy who's sitting on this fucking case in Georgia right now in Fulton County, won't let the fucking ballots be examined from 5 years ago. They're supposed to keep those ballots, and he's just not hearing the trial. He's not hearing the case. So there's some crazy fucking shit going on, dude. It's crazy. So I would like to see some justice for all that, because in my mind it's a wild one. And I think that's probably why he's been so. He's very adamant about it. This probably always happens in every election. You know what I mean? But he just was like not going to take it. He was not going to have it. And it was wild. And I thought it was like crazy. And the more I looked into it, the more it's like all these things. It's like all the people screaming about the COVID thing. Like, oh shit, another conspiracy is proven right. Another conspiracy is proven right. Another conspiracy is proven right. It's a mass fucking psyop, dude. Like they seriously, they had to hold back those votes to fucking stuff those boxes for like 7 to 10 days after the election, maybe 2 weeks in some of these places. And like, oh, we're still counting. We don't know. We're still counting. That's like fucking that's some third world shit you see. Like we should know on election night who fucking won the election. The fact that we don't, like the next day may be ridiculous. In America, that's crazy. We can't audit. We can't actually see. All that shit should be on a fucking blockchain. Like we should be able to see.
This should be an easy problem to solve.
It is an easy problem to solve, but they don't want the problem solved, right? That's the problem, right? They want to be able to run all these games and do all this bullshit and, have entire, swing state cities where they hold the votes, for days after, when they figure out, okay, they won these counties. How many more do we need to come up with and fucking coming through the back? Wild. But yeah, there is a lot. If you really start to dig into it, it's fucking wild. It's fucking wild. But they did prove it this cycle. They caught those fuckers on the ground trying to stuff in 6,000 fake registrations. So there was a news story about it, at least, from what I saw. So again, I've gone down this fucking rabbit hole, man. But Jeffrey A. Tucker, this is an interesting one. I keep hearing whispers that Trump is acting like a tyrant, but this is sloppy and ahistorical thinking. The powers he is using and the orders he is issuing are mostly aimed at government power, guaranteeing free speech, stopping legal privileging, stopping spending and hiring and regulating, and even stopping the use of government power to use demographics to manipulate elections. This is what the president is supposed to do, according to the Constitution. He is supposed to be the manager of executive agencies. That no one has done this so aggressively in 100+ years just shows you how lame have been the people elected to this position.
Yeah, I think that's a good and accurate take. These are good things. I think it's just Trump he kind of gets in his own way a little bit when he goes off the cuff, like all of those things, policy decisions, actions, those are good. And those are things that a president should be doing. But then when you get up there and you call people names, or you just kind of start taking low shots, it discredits it.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, it's not.
That's the idea.
It's not that it's not presidential. It's like it's kind of, forget the president. It's just like a discrediting way to act as a human being. So it's like, and maybe that's part of why he's so effective, because he's such a bully, right? And maybe
it's a double-edged sword.
It is, but I think that's where a lot of like. If you ripped it out and you just looked at, here are the policies on a piece of paper, I think like an overwhelming majority, we got an overwhelming majority, but a more overwhelming majority would be like, okay, this is good. But then when it's the person saying it is like making fun of, mentally disabled people, or doing, calling somebody this name or that name, you're just like, fuck, that's just a bully on the playground being a dick. And it kind of discredits it. It's a double-edged sword. It's
Yeah,
an
I think
interesting one to unpack. Maybe that's part of his superpower.
That is, it's part of it's his greatest weakness and his greatest.
I know,
power, in
but
my
it's fucking annoying.
Do you want to hear Bernie back in
Oh, here.
2015? Or should we just read this
Open
take?
borders. That's a Koch, what is it, the Koch brothers proposal, which essentially says there is no United States. It would make everyone in America poor. Right-wing people would love an open border to bring in all kinds of people to work for $2 to $3 an hour. Bernie Sanders in 2015. So it looks like he's obviously changed his take, probably, right? So I know, James, you had some interesting thoughts on the border situation and everything. I think you posted a little bit about that as well. What are your thoughts now?
Yeah, I mean, to basically summarize and not to go, because this could be another 4 hours.
Oh, this will be a 4-hour conversation. For sure.
But if the government, if the United States Postal Service is operating at a $5 billion deficit every year, why is it that we think that the federal government's doing a good job patrolling the border? And so I guess my idea, and going back to Professor Walter Block, he has a great quote. If it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Since everything either does move or doesn't move, privatize it. And so I think privatizing the border would do a much better job than the federal government in both enforcement and in immigration policy. I think our immigration system is completely broken. If we're going to talk about financials, we also have to talk about the immigration, because that is obviously a huge part of it. But yeah, I struggle to say that I am a completely open borders person. But I do believe that it should be controlled by private industry rather than by the
But
government.
what's the financial incentive there? Because obviously, like, how do they make money? Like, that's my question. So
Well,
in my mind, like, the government should do like one or two things, and that's like, national security is like one of those things, in my opinion. Like, so that is like their one of their very few jobs that they have, right? So like in my mind, it's like how could you privatize that? Because who's gonna pay? That's what I'm just trying to figure
Well, you're
out. Like,
paying
what's the
anyways.
financial incentive?
It's just
Yeah.
the effectiveness of the body that's enforcing what you're trying to accomplish.
I think it's
So
almost like
there's
a military thing. Like, we have the best military in the world, right? Like, that's because
that's
we're America, right? So I
that's
feel like that's kind of an extension of that.
that's reasonable, but I think like the question of, can you create incentives that get better outcome? You can always do that with private entities.
well,
Mhm.
I think
Well,
how many
let's-
people you catch, how many, I'm being facetious,
Yeah.
but like there are ways to do it, and we're already spending,
Yeah.
right? It's like we would spend less on internal resources, taxpayer dollars, or maybe you spend the same, but it'd be more effective from an outcome.
let's say you're the Department of Homeland Security, or let's say you're the Department of Immigration and Customs
Mhm.
Enforcement. You have a budget, right? And so what would be the quickest way for you to pad your budget and to get more money into the coffers of whatever you're trying to accomplish? Create a boogeyman. You say, this is the reason, Joe America, this is the reason why you didn't make as much money this year. Or this is the reason why your dollar doesn't go as far.
Mhm.
It's this guy coming over from Honduras. And you point to that and you say,
Yeah.
okay, well, all we have to do is stop the flow of this low wage immigration
Mhm.
coming across the border, and all your problems will be solved. And what do people do? They send billions upon billions of dollars to these federal agencies, and these federal agencies spend this money like there's no tomorrow. And so how does the federal government make money off it? Because we vote for it. And how do we vote for it? Because we think there's a huge problem. If we look at the economics behind immigration historically, again, I'm going to come back to the historical argument. Immigration, especially in the second and third generations, not the person maybe who comes over, but the children that they have and the children that they have give way more to the economy than they take out in benefits.
So you're saying that, I mean, 'cause what's happening in the past 4 years, I mean, it wasn't like a natural thing that happened. Like, they're looking into this now and like they're exposing all this. Like, they're taking taxpayer money and funding all these NGOs that are turning around and helping facilitate this mass migration of across the border, further drain on resources in cities and places like that. At least the first generation. Your argument is like second, third generation later, maybe they'll contribute more to society. But like right now, like they're coming in and they're in hospitals, schools, taking over gyms, and this is not even natural. This is a resettlement that is being facilitated by our taxpayer money. So we're paying to do this. To me, this is absolutely insane, and the people should have a say in that, right? Not it being hidden through NGOs and webs of grift and fraud. We paid like some Lutheran church $200 million every couple months to do this. I mean, like, obviously massive fucking fraud is occurring. There's a massive grift occurring here. So like, I'm kind of with you where it's like, hey, our immigration system is broken. If people want to come and they want to pay to come and they want to fucking figure it out to walk and do whatever, come to a place and like we'll figure out a way to like make it simpler so they can come if they pass the thing or whatever. You fill out papers, whatever. You get an actual ID. We know who you are. You pass you're not a fucking murderer or criminal like what the
Why can't,
500,000 that actually came in the past 4 years. Literally 500,000 criminals came across the
but
border.
why is it, to your point, Matt, why is
Yeah.
it that we can't go back to a simplified version, an Ellis
Yeah.
Island style version of a criminal check, background check,
Yeah.
a disease check,
Uh-huh.
and here's your social security number. Now you
I
pay
don't
taxes.
disagree with that. I think
Right.
that's actually, hey, but as long as I'm not facilitating that through, shady NGOs where millions going here, millions going to the cartel here, we're doing this, the pastor's getting a couple mil, all this crazy shit, that's what's actually happening with my own taxpayer money. So like I'm actively against what happened the past 4 years, making an app so they can, all this crazy shit. Like I'm against that, right? But what you said, yeah, for sure. I think, we need to simplify it a little bit more, right? Like let the free market kind of figure it out if they want to come and do it. But the mass resettlement on my dime that's occurred the past 4 years, I'm totally actively against. And the gaslighting and the lying and the doing all this shit, like there's not a problem. And, actively, not letting the people on the border do their jobs. I mean, crazy, craziness.
Well, the other argument is that always that these people are coming to achieve welfare benefits, that they're coming here to live off the government dole. And what that shows is it's
I mean,
just-
they're not coming for that reason. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like they're not like, oh, I'm gonna go get a bunch of benefits. But like when you take a bunch of fucking Haitian people that don't speak English and you park them in a small rural community in the middle of nowhere on the taxpayer dime, of course they're going to be consuming resources from the community. There's, medical care. You can just go to the emergency room and get free healthcare, right? We'll send you a bill. Yeah, it's a fucking outrageous bill, but 99% of people don't fucking pay the bill. So like,
No,
yeah, I mean, they go to the school system. They're, they're in gyms that taxpayers have paid for. And like so like, I feel like you can't have it both ways. Like if you want to have this free and open thing, you can't have a socialized system that fucking pays for it
So
all.
you sound like Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman
Yeah.
said you can't have open borders with a welfare state.
That's how I feel. Yeah.
Well, what the
Yeah.
data has shown since Milton Friedman has passed
Uh-huh.
is that we've seen, with greater rates of immigration, we've seen a better economy. And when we see it, and the reason for that is because the more producers you have in an economy, the better your economy is to grow. And so not only do we have more producers, but the flip side of that would also be we have more consumers. And so the more people you have in the economy and the more people you have contributing into the economy by working. And again, you hit the nail on the head. These people are usually coming across. They're not competing with you and I. They're not competing for, doctor jobs and finance jobs. They're competing for low wages. And that, to me, historically has been a good thing for the American economy. And so this idea of the boogeyman, and I agree with you that it shouldn't be taxpayer funded, shouldn't be bringing them over, and shouldn't be funding NGOs.
That's what's been happening. I mean,
I agree. And when I say privatize the border, just to kind of summarize this, and I'll stop talking after this. But what I mean is, why do we have a government border? Why is it not that those are private citizens that own the land on the border and they can make a decision whether or not they want to hire the guy from Honduras to come and work their land? Or if he wants to go across their land and into a 7-Eleven and buy a pack of smokes, why is it my job or the government's job to tell him he can't do that?
I mean, I guess my thought on that would be like, why do we even have nation states then? Why do we have, any kind of state? I mean, in my mind, like if you have a state or, a country, like that's their one fucking job, like protection, like protect your citizenry. Like in my mind, that's like the main thing that comes up. Like, your one role, the one thing that like I don't mind sending my tax dollars for is like, let's have a military so we can defend. Let's fucking, let's have an actual border so I don't have like fucking some murderer coming across killing my daughter. Like there's, there's all these stories about these illegal aliens that have come across and totally slaughtered people and
But
done
those are the
sorts of.
exceptions. Those aren't the rules.
I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I do hear that argument, but it is a substantial amount, and there is a substantial amount of crime that has come with that, right? So I have no problem simplifying the system, but there should be some system. There should be something there. My personal opinion is one of the few roles the government actually should do is that, in my opinion. But I recognize where you're coming from.
I understand what you're saying. And again,
Yeah.
I think we agree on a lot more than we're going to disagree on.
Yeah.
My whole thing is that I do not believe that if it's important, the federal government should be in charge of it. I believe it.
Well, they are in charge of the most important thing, which is our military, right? Like but I hear when it comes to everything else, I generally agree.
I actually wrote my undergrad thesis at Ave
Uh-huh.
on privatizing police, military, and the court system.
Really? That's amazing. That's amazing.
So I'm a little biased when it comes to
Okay, all right. No worries. Hey, I hear you. Vivek, the biggest threat to capitalism is crony capitalism. I agree. A lot of people attribute like a lot of these, big corporations and all this stuff. They're like, oh, this is capitalism failed. Like that's not real capitalism. That's like total crony capitalism where they've like bribed all these politicians and have all these moats and fake laws they put into power. But what do you guys have on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that capitalism in its own concept is good. And we talked about this, Maddie, last time we were here, where it's kind of like this power threshold. I think we actually used Elon as the example where, the quest begins noble. And let's not use him as an example here, but the quest begins noble. The system of capitalism is good. But then when you start to reap the benefits disproportionately of that system and you have more power, then it's kind of like you cross the line a little bit. Now you're cross that line, and then you cross the next line, and then you cross the next line, and you forget where you started and what the ultimate endeavor was, and that leads to crony capitalism, and that's bullshit, and that will blow up.
Paul, can you go back up for a second, just to the tweet above that?
Definitely.
Yes, the great virtue of a free market system that does not care what color people are, does not care what their religion is, and only cares whether they can produce something you want to buy. So that kind of ties into the immigration argument as well.
That's a Milton Friedman quote. Yeah, it is the most effective system we have discovered to enable people who hate one another to deal with one another and help one another. Yeah, I think he hits the nail on the head.
And whenever somebody has a critique of capitalism, I think the word, obviously Karl Marx coined it, they're talking about crony capitalism.
They're not talking about real capitalism. They're talking about crony capitalism. Yeah.
The other problem we have is we have, capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich with respect to,
absolutely
when shit hits the fan, right? And businesses are not allowed to die. The banks are not allowed to die.
Crazy.
The government comes in and prints the money to keep companies alive. And so, that was the second quote on there, something about fiat money. But I mean, that's something that is a problem. And it is exacerbating wealth inequality. And we're at, this late stage capitalism phase where less and less people are thriving in our version of capitalism.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with
the cronyism,
the cronyism, but also and
fiat money printing.
I would put fiat money printing in the category of cronyism in a lot of ways, because the politicians are bought, right? They're bought by various vested interests or elites or banks or whatever it is, and they basically force them to pass laws to keep them to keep themselves in power and to keep these people wealthy. So that creates issues, and companies then go in and fire workers when things are bad, and the workers kind of keep getting screwed.
It reminds me of I think it was Friedrich Hayek when they founded the Federal Reserve. He said, "Look, you're going to create a really when you have a fire and you're a forest and you don't let the small fire come through and cleanse it out, like you're going to have a great big fire, and it's going to be really bad. It's going to be way worse, right?" So Friedrich Hayek said that. It was like, don't do this. Don't do the Federal Reserve. You're not going to allow the natural cycle to cleanse itself. You're going to kick that can down the road. And then what did we have? The Great Depression, right? So he kind of called that and said it's going to be way worse. And then that Great Depression came after the Roaring '20s.
But this is what I see with tariffs. I see tariffs as a crony capitalistic measure.
Yeah.
Where you're centrally planning the economy. You have Donald Trump or whoever in the regulatory agencies that says, "Oh no, we know better than letting the invisible hand of the market work and cleansing the forest in many ways."
That's true. Yeah. But going back to the tariff thing on that, it's more like it's just a tool to use to get out of the hole. Right. So I totally agree with the fact that everything you just said, that it's not free market and it's not the most effective long term, but it's kind of a short term gap to like rebalance stuff and then let it rip. Maybe. I don't know.
I like the idea of the national security element of like saying, hey, we're going to provide, we want to have some, this is a critical industry, right? Like you said, 43,000 industries, obviously not critical industries, but like there are a couple things that are critical that we probably should say, hey, we need this to happen. We need to make some motive for this to be produced here. So to me, that makes sense, as the government's one job is national security, which is what I think their job should be, right?
But back to the criticism about the central bank. I mean, part of the problem is the Fed, right? And the Fed says it's not political, but it's entirely political, because it never lets the market set the price of capital to then come in and force the government to think about balancing the budget or spending less, right? Every time the treasury market shows any bit of dysfunction, the the Fed comes in and prints money. And so Congress and DC at large say, you know what, like we have no risk of running up ridiculous deficits forever because the Fed has our back. And that's political, right? Because there are certain segments of the economy, asset owners, homeowners, banks, that really thrive and benefit from that environment. And then there are parts of the economy, the poor, renters, et cetera, that keep getting screwed by this.
Sounds like you're describing the Cantillon effect.
So that's the that's part of the issue with capitalism, but it's really, this end the Fed kind of concept that, gets tossed around in the Bitcoin community a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of legitimacy to it. We've been talking about it for, since its creation.
If you think about it, it just makes perfect sense. We don't centrally plan the price of eggs or milk or anything like that. So like, why the fuck would we do it for the most important thing in society, which is money itself?
So I guess with respect to tariffs, it's like if we're not gonna end the Fed, even though we should, then this is a way to kind of, in some ways, it's taking some power back, maybe from what the Fed is doing, and giving it to the administration to try to push policy and push the economy in a direction that it seems fit. Now, you may say, well, they're hypocritical. They're only going to do what they want to do to enrich their interests, and that's possible. And we may ultimately be sitting here later, and Trump has made Elon even wealthier, and Bezos and every other billionaire that sat in front of the cabinet at the inauguration, which I thought was a horrible look. But maybe it won't, right? Maybe there will be some more talk about the common man and the working class and the like. And this is tariffs are just a tool to help do that, because the Fed is not out of play, right? They're not doing anything to eliminate wealth inequality issues. They're just they're exacerbating them.
Like I said, if you were going to end the Fed, if you were going to abolish the income tax and replace it with tariffs, I would be on board with you guys.
I'm totally on board with that. That sounds like
a great plan.
I think we're compounding the problem by adding tariffs.
Wasn't that like that was how it was in America from like what, the 1800s, the 1900s?
Oh yeah, when Andrew Jackson, he abolished the central bank.
The most, I think it was the wealthiest period, or like the most wealth creation that ever occurred was during that period. I can't remember what the age was called, but I think it was from like the late 1800s to like the early-ish 1900s or something like that. It was
and what wound up happening during those periods of time is we had very short panics, right? We had banking panics, and what wound up happening is banks went out of business, and some consumers lost money. Capitalism kind of reset itself quickly, and we thrived again. And to your analogy from earlier, it's like when we keep putting out the fires before we have before we have the big one, then like
well, you take more risk.
You don't let the little one happen.
Yeah, we don't let
you have the mother of all fires.
Yeah, exactly.
Let the brush clear itself out naturally. With a little fire, you end up with that brush just growing and growing and growing, and that's where we're at. I mean,
well, it incentivizes bad behavior.
You're exactly right.
It's like if you're at a blackjack table and you're splitting tens every time. Like, book says don't do that, but if you know that somebody's got your back and you're just going to get another reload of chips because you're out of chips, you're going to split tens every time. You're going to go for that black. You're going to go for that 21. What's a 20 when you can have a 21?
So does the book actually say to don't split tens? What if the guy's like what if the dealer's showing a 2 or 3?
Never split tens.
Never split. The book says never split. Wow, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the game is rigged regardless.
A deeper analogy would be like the dealer's showing a 10 and you've got 10s and you're going to split them because you can get 2 aces and beat it. And why not go for the win if you know that I'm not going to lose?
Yeah.
You'll take that risk every time. And then it incentivizes that sort of behavior. That's the Fed.
There, he looked it up. The Gilded Age. He looked it up. The period you're referring to is often called the Gilded Age in the United States, which roughly spanned from the late 1860s to about 1900. However, there was no instance during that time where the Federal Reserve was shut down, because the Federal Reserve didn't even exist until 1913. So
there's no.
I think you might.
There was no central bank.
No central bank. Right. Yeah. The central bank was established in 1913.
But there was a banking panic in 1873. There was a banking panic in 1907, and we did okay. We kept kind of going. Kept kind of moving along.
And ultimately, a lot of these panics, I mean, all the stuff that was happening was because, in my opinion, the failure of gold to be sound money in a lot of ways. It's not divisible. It's not, that divisibility problem really made it hard to transact with. If you wanted to use small value transactions, what are you going to chip off a flake of gold to give it to them, right? It's
well, then it becomes less real too, because you feel like what you're actually transacting in is this paper that's backed by gold, and then again, like the line keeps getting further and further and further. Well, we already use this paper, so maybe we just make a little bit more paper, and then a little bit.
Well, a lot of banks actually did that.
Shitload more paper, right?
Yeah. So I think Bitcoin kind of takes a lot of gold's best characteristics and evolves on that, right? Which is why it's such a powerful, the best performing asset in all of human history. I mean, hard to argue with that.
No argument here.
Let's see. Real Spike Cohen. He's a good one. I'm sure James is a fan.
All libertarians on this.
Government fought the numbers game, then introduced the lottery. It fought Ponzi schemes, then introduced Social Security. It fought organized crime, then introduced the FBI, civil forfeiture, and qualified immunity. Government doesn't fight crime; it fights competition. I love that take.
Same thing with immigration. I mean, they create boogeyman, and then they create these federal agencies to combat it.
That's a good for full circle example of that. I think totally.
Government corruption we've seen. Government corruption we haven't even seen yet. Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing, especially this week with all of this stuff happening with USAID is just the tip of the spear. I mean, there's just such a level of corruption and grift and fraud that's occurring with our tax dollars. It's unimaginable. Most people just can't even comprehend it. Here's a take from, I think this was just a small guy. I think I just saw this. I don't know if he's a large account, but yeah, I like what his take was. Tariffs are primarily a bargain chip to bring unfair actions of another country back into alignment and remove unfair trade practices. The idea isn't for it to be in place forever, just until the other country corrects its wrong. No need to panic. Just wait it out. So that's a kind of my response to James's take, which is that is like,
Yeah.
it's not it's obviously not an optimal outcome to have more tariffs.
I agree with that very much. And the tool can be used
Yeah.
in
It's a nonviolent.
non-economic
It's a
ways.
nonviolent tool to get.
It's a economic statecraft.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the way I
Yeah.
like to look at it.
Economic force is the term Trump used when they asked him if he was going to annex Canada. If he would use force, he said, not force, economic force. Okay, let's see if this
So
this
is pretty good. Secretary of State Marco Rubio just absolutely ripped the deep state slush fund known as USAID. I am the acting director of USAID. My frustrations with USAID go back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. Every dollar we spend will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. USAID has a history of ignoring that and deciding that they're a global charity. These are not donor dollars. These are taxpayer dollars. Couldn't agree more.
Didn't what's the
Watch the clip. Play the clip.
Salvador president Bukele, didn't he say something similar? He basically was like USAID is basically bullshit because the money comes here and 90% of it goes to folks in our country that don't need the money, that are already wealthy. If the money's not getting to where you think it is, or it's being
politically connected,
used by U.S. economic hitmen to try to foster change of control in governments and regime shifts and.
Yeah, we're funding the BBC, we're funding Politico. I mean, this shit is just wild. I mean, like crazy what's happening. I think Elon cut off all of the funding for Politico or something like that, and then they can't pay any of their employees now. And they're doing regime change here and regime change there and propaganda here and propaganda there. It's like it's wild what's been going on. I mean, we shouldn't be funding the BBC propaganda and all these other news stations. I mean, this is a free market. If they want to have a service, they better tell the truth and get people to actually pay for it. And taxpayers shouldn't be paying for it when we don't even know about it. I mean, that's wild. So in the future that I want to see is all of government spending completely public on a blockchain, right? Like you can still have stuff that's like, oh, this is for like intelligence activities. So at least we know, like we might not know what exactly it's going for, but we can be like, okay, they carved out $200 billion for like, intelligence, the intelligence community. Like, okay, we can live with that. But what we can't live with is like, hey, we've never passed an audit. We have no idea where any of this money went. Oh shit, we're funding the Taliban over here and we didn't even know about it. It's craziness.
I love the Jesse Ventura idea that during the debates, all the candidates should have to wear NASCAR jackets. Sponsors.
That's great. That's great. Oh, okay. Trump prosecutors. This is what I was telling you guys earlier. So all these fucking prosecutors who are fucking going after Trump, they're literally being funded by USAID. Trump prosecutors were funded by USAID. This push to prosecute Trump by Alvin Bragg Soros was a minor co-funder. He gave them $10,000. That's it. The $14 million he gave to the parent company, the fiscal sponsor, FJP, Fair and Just Prosecution. I love how they have all these great names where they put these little organizations like this is the Save the Puppies Act when it's like slaughtering millions of them. Like Fair and Just Prosecution,
STPA, actually.
a nonprofit that supports and influences progressive prosecutors in the U.S. Well, that ain't shit compared to the $27 million that USAID gave them. So, I mean, every time you hear the word Soros prosecutor, no, they're USAID prosecutors. This is absolutely insane that this is what's going on. So this guy, Mike Pence, has been fantastic. I mean, he's been talking about this for the past 2 years. I mean, it is like he is just blowing the lid off this shit. It's finally getting into the actual ethos, and people are like actually finding out now that Elon and Doge got in there to see all this shit. Like, what the fuck is actually happening? And it is wild. Very wild. What do you got for us, Paul? Move us along here.
I thought there was an interesting take that you had added here about the Department of Education, and since
Yeah,
there's
okay. I know we've
discussion,
talked about this before. So massive increase in spending after the Department of Education was created with no actual improvement in education. So like they just keep throwing more money at this thing, and student outcomes are actually going down. Yeah, look at this. They're not going up at all. There's been no change, like no nothing. Math scores, reading scores, science scores have literally gone down since they started doing this. And like we've just seen the number of employees, the total cost, and it's just another example of the federal government absolutely failing at what they're doing. So I think they absolutely should end the Department of Education. They should punt this back to the states, let each state work on it, and then they can copy each other and figure out the way federalism was supposed to work. Hey, this state has like outsized outcomes. Let's copy what they're doing because it's fucking working. Instead, they're just punting money down the toilet, wasting our taxpayer dollars, and students are getting dumber. Literally,
And that's
like not improving at all.
that's just K through 12. I mean,
Yeah, that's
imagine what's going on in the American universities.
it's a whole nother
These
grift and
sports
fraud.
franchises that are dabbling in economic pastime or academic pastimes.
Yeah,
Where I mean, look where their budgets are going.
that's crazy.
Facilities, and I mean,
Yeah,
you throw money at it. Where is this money actually going?
Yeah. So this is a funny one, funny little meme. So if we don't let athletes bet on games they have the ability to influence, why do we allow Congress to invest in companies they regulate? So I've always been like torn on this. Like I want people to be able to invest, but like what do you guys think about this? Like, I mean, obviously they shouldn't be
I mean,
investing.
the
Insider trading,
congressional insider trading is off the charts.
it's off the charts. Yeah, it's
I
got
mean,
to stop.
and it's almost like it's gotten so bad that we have to ban it because there's kind of no middle ground. I mean, whether it's the Pelosi stuff or just everybody. I mean, and I think
So what's the off ramp? Like, if I served a political office, like I wouldn't want to stop buying Bitcoin. Like,
you can own, you can,
know what I mean?
you
Like-
can just, well, I don't know.
So
about
how would you-
Bitcoin, but
so
can
how
own
would
pa-
you
You can
do
own
that?
passive. You can just own passive ETFs that
Uh-huh.
you're allowed to have exposure to a variety of different asset classes. I think the government has a retirement plan that for its workers, and it's like you can, these are the certain ETFs. You could buy the S&P, you could buy the Nasdaq, you could buy this particular Bitcoin ETF or this particular ETF, and that's it.
But no active.
No,
day
no,
trading.
no active day trading,
Yeah.
no individual stocks, and you know what? You're serving your country, and that's
Part of being a public
and,
servant.
and that's what it is.
Yeah.
And then now the argument maybe is, oh, we're not going to attract the best people to Congress because they can't trade stuff. Like we're already not attracting the best people to Congress, so I don't think that's a deterrent necessarily.
If
And
that's the incentive to come to
right.
Congress, something's wrong.
Right. So, but it's got to stop. These guys are in committees. They're making laws, and they're literally trading in companies that are affected by policies and committee hearings. I mean,
Yeah.
it's wild. It's really,
it's
completely out
that
of
is
control.
absolutely
It's completely
out
out
of
of control.
A couple of years ago, I went up to Tallahassee to testify at the Capitol. We were trying to get rid of corporate welfare in the state of Florida. Sorry, get rid of corporate welfare in the state of Florida. And I went up there with a think tank, and we were very free market oriented, as you can imagine. And when I walked into the chambers, I'll never forget. All you saw were representatives from Marriott and Disney and Hilton, and all these people who are throwing money at the government so that they could receive money back. And that just
Really?
changed my entire opinion on what we were actually fighting. It's not necessarily these people; it's where they're getting the money from and the incentives that they there have. So if
Yeah.
you take the incentives away, I agree.
Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. I mean, it's very clear. Yeah, this was the bomb. This is where I got that take. I just saw someone say Nancy Pelosi should manage the new U.S. sovereign wealth fund, and honestly, I can't disagree. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a satirical example of
That's
what
where I
we
got
just
it
said.
Oh, that where you got that from?
yeah. That's classic. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about this idea of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund? I know a lot of other countries have a wealth fund and do all this stuff. It in my mind, it seems better. I mean, obviously, you'd have to figure out some entitlement reform to maybe go with it or something. But I'd rather definitely have my country owning actual valuable assets as opposed to like running a Ponzi scheme like Social Security. It doesn't have the money that I don't know. I
I mean, most of the sovereign wealth funds around the world have been generated by excesses from trade, right? So we don't generate any excesses here from trade. I mean, Alaska has a sovereign wealth fund, right? I mean, Alaska has and that money gets from oil sales, and that gets funded back into payments that go to the Alaskan citizens. So we kind of have that example here.
Wyoming as well. I think Cynthia Lummis was talking about it the other day. She said that it's been a major success for them.
I mean, the U.S. government has a lot of assets that can be privatized and we can use that money, to invest. I think one of the examples that Lutnick gave at the press conference was it would have been nice when we gave all this money to make masks here that the government took an equity piece in some of these businesses that made a shitload of money in America. And so there's some, Trump has said, well, we'll invest in TikTok. I mean, look, I mean, there's definitely, some issues with it. How are we going to fund it? Where's the money going to come from? We're already, again, 36 trillion in debt. So are we going to privatize some assets to take that money to reinvest it in certain other things? I think the concept makes some sense. I think, who's going to run it? Is it going to be a government employee? Is it going to be an outsourced board from, I think Chamath put something out about who should run it. It should be an outsourced rotating board of folks that are from industry, that leave their industry, that come to the run this
I think
for
Chamath
a
had,
year
and the
or
pod, you listen to that. I agree with that take. I mean, I think if we're going to socialize the losses, if we're going to socialize a lot of this shit, the taxpayer damn better.
Look, there's been a lot of DARPA
Mm-hmm.
creations that have led to inventions that the U.S. government hasn't made any money off of. There's been a lot of biotech research that's led to drugs the U.S. government hasn't made any money off of. So I can understand taking equity ownership in certain types of speculative types of things in that regard. But again, where's the money going to come from? Does it fit with the budget? When we run
the taxpayers paying for it anyway, they should get some of the upside.
I thought it was a joke when I first read it. When I first read that we were going to move towards a sovereign wealth fund, I said a country that's $30 trillion in debt is now going to. And I'm going to take this back to the filter that
you got to watch this Howard Lutnick podcast, bro. It's so good. He's like, we're sitting on all these resources. Like, we got all this shit. We have all this oil. We have all this gold. We have all this shit. Like,
That's the problem is we're leaving it up. Again, if it's important, I don't want the federal government in charge of it. And again, I'm going to take that example. Why does the post office, which
why does the post office even exist?
Which
When
operates
you
a
have
business that
USPS and everything else.
Right. So USPS and FedEx
Or was it
operated a
UPS?
$15 billion, or UPS and FedEx operated a $15 billion surplus, black surplus.
Yeah. So why
every year?
So why do we even?
USPS is $5 billion in debt.
So why do
every
we
year.
have the USPS? That's what I don't understand.
It's the same reason. And again, this might be my most
If
controversial.
UPS exists and FedEx exists, why do we have USPS? That's what I'm trying to understand. That why do they even exist?
It stems back to the Constitution because there is a line in there about the federal government should
Educate me. Let's hear this.
The federal government should provide money for post roads, and so that has been interpreted through constitutional jurisprudence that means that the post office has a constitutional right to exist, which is absolute bullshit.
So you think it's bullshit?
Absolute bullshit. It's a completely positivistic interpretation of what that was supposed to mean. Now, again.
So what did they mean? What do you think that? What do you like?
I think at the time you were on a horse and you had to get your love letter. Are you up to your side piece? So you needed some way to get that letter there, and so you needed roads. And so what they were saying was, oh, if we don't provide the roads, who's going to do it? Which FedEx and UPS have proven. Oh, if the government doesn't provide mail, somebody will.
Yeah,
and do it a lot better.
I think you're right.
Other countries have had some more positive success with their sovereign wealth funds, whether it be Norway or Saudi, UAE. But look, I agree with you. I mean, I think the issue is, are we hawking the family jewels to pay back the debt? I mean, and that's an issue, right? Are we gonna privatize all of I-95? Are we gonna sell all of our rare earth resources to and then what happens, right? Are we just gonna take that money and then keep spending it? So I don't know. I agree with you. Where's that money going to come from? I think is an important distinction, and we should really be focused on. We shouldn't be selling all the family jewels yet. We should be getting our house, and we shouldn't be using that to get our house. If we're not going to use that money to pay down the debt, then that's a big problem. Like we got to pay down the debt. We got to get our house in order. And if we're going to use privatizing of government assets to do it, I'm okay with it. But if we're just going to take that money and then go reinvest it in other shit, I don't know if I'm okay with it.
So just to your point about 75, right? A great thought experiment. You guys can take this and run with it. But if we were to privatize 75, why don't we just have it paid for by the people who put the billboards up? Why don't we call it the Dunkin' Donuts Highway or the whatever Amazon Expressway or whatever, and then they have to take care of it. And then the money that they get from either the tolls or whatever else goes back towards balancing the budget. I think that's a great idea.
I like that idea too a lot. I love that idea. All right, Paul, let's do one more. I think we've gone over two hours here, so
yeah, you guys have been cooking.
We could go all night, but
so
for everybody,
there is quite a few takes left. I'll let you decide which one you want to touch on.
I'm going to add more. We can save some for Friday, so just you can leave the tabs up for the Friday, and anybody who's here now is welcome to come back and be on Friday as well.
Sounds good.
Like that.
So
let's see.
If you want to touch on this one, feel free. Let me show you.
Let me just touch on this one. I'll finish this one. This is one of my favorite things that's happened. This. I think this is little Elizabeth Warren's little slush fund scam, this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Trump has fired Rohit Chopra, director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He embodied the worst excesses of the administrative state, an unaccountable bureaucrat wielding regulatory power like a cudgel against American businesses and financial institutions. His tenure was marked by aggressive overreach, weaponizing regulation to impose a progressive economic agenda that stifled innovation, reduced consumer choice, and burdened small lenders with crushing compliance costs. Rather than fostering a competitive market, he used the CFPB as a political tool to punish industries that didn't align with leftist orthodoxy, undermining the free market principles that drive American prosperity. His disdain for due process and preference for rule by fiat made him an unelected economic czar, choking economic growth under the guise of consumer protection. By firing Chopra, Trump is striking a blow against the deep state's regulatory stranglehold, restoring accountability, and freeing the economy from ideological interference. I love that quote. I love that whole post. What do you guys think?
Good riddance.
Good riddance. Yeah, I think I'm so sick of being treated like a child. Like, we are fucking grown adults. Like, people make bad decisions, you learn from your decisions, you move on. I mean, that's just part of life, right? Like, in order to be an adult, a contributing member of society, you have to bear some level of personal responsibility. And I think as a society, we've gotten so far to this point that we need to be protected from everything. It's like, no, people can fucking fail. Shit happens. You figure it out. People, your friends, your family, whoever builds you up, brings you back up, and or you bring yourself back up, right? That's part of the human experience. And I think all this like total nonsense about having no personal accountability, no personal responsibility, and not even letting failure to occur, whether it's in our markets, whether it's with our people, whether it's with what it makes a weaker society. And I think we've come to that point in society where there's so much weakness and so much just excess of fraud and abuse and propaganda and nonsense, that it's time to get back to being a free citizen in a free society where there are consequences for making bad decisions. That's part of life. You learn from them and you move on and you grow, right?
Amen.
I think this gets to your point about giving the government power, and they generally will fuck it up. I think when Warren created this, right, there was noble intention behind creating this bureau, right? And there was
the road to hell has been paved on the best of intentions.
Exactly, right? And so she had a thought, right? And I'm trying to help people. They're getting fucked by various companies, banks, whatever it is. And what winds up happening is money got involved in that bureau and money and power, and all of a sudden, there's fraud.
Well, and this is bad, and that is good. The subjective decision making of what goes and what doesn't go, it's been a huge part of Choke Point 2.0. It's like, well, why is this bad? Back to my point of why is consuming energy bad? Just in a vacuum. Like, why not have a conversation? Or we talked about this before. Anytime that everybody should be able to have a conversation, and they can make their points, but it needs to be rooted in logic.
Yeah.
When you just come out here and say, well, that's bad. Energy consumption is bad. The fuck are you talking about? Back it up.
I agree with you.
I am, though, concerned that, the consumers who originally were supposed to be helped by, let's say, this organization, and like who is looking out for them still? I'm still a little bit concerned that with what we're doing here with Doge and what we're doing, like we're still going to wind up leaving a lot of people behind.
Right.
And I'm not sure that there's a lot of thought being given, to that. And as the government retrenches in size, and we start firing, this voluntary buyout of all the federal government workers, which is 20,000 workers, we'll probably get up to at least 100,000 workers, or so. And there's going to be a lot more layoffs. What is going to happen to these folks, right? After they get their 6 months of severance, whatever it is, are they going to? I think the thought is that they're going to compete in the private economy now. Are these workers that are fired from federal government jobs, are they going to be able to compete in the private economy? Are there going to be jobs for these people in the private economy where AI is ramping up further and taking more jobs away from, these are, white collar jobs, let's say they're back office jobs or administrative jobs. They're ripe for technology, right? They're ripe for AI. They're ripe to get completely replaced. So more and more folks are going to be removed from the public payroll and the private payroll. What is going to happen to them? Are we reskilling them? Are we training them? Are we going to be, improving unemployment insurance? Are we moving to a place where UBI is actually necessary in the society? I don't think that this administration, or even the last administration, is giving much thought to some of those longer term issues about employment in this country. I think there's a hope that tariffs and manufacturing jobs. We're just going to put all these people to work in the plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the reality is we're not, right? We're gonna build plants here. They're going to be heavily robotic, technology driven with robots, and so, are we giving a lot of thought to the segments of society that are being left behind? I am concerned about that. I don't think
That's an interesting.
I don't think the right does a good job on that. I think the left
Yeah.
does a better job thinking about them.
Yeah.
Their solutions haven't been great.
I mean,
but I am concerned about that, and
we're just living in two different worlds, though, man. Like, I'm watching these people on TikTok, like, how dare Donald Trump tell me I have to go back to the office? I can't just be at home all day, like crying on thing. And there's hundreds of these people in Reddit swarming. It's like we're living in two different realities. Like, I mean, like that's a different world, like a different, like you're living in like La La Land. You're living in fake land, like not living in real life. I feel like, right? For many of us entrepreneurs who are working in real, society, where we actually have to provide value to get compensated for that, right? It's just it's a totally different reality. I would say
that's a tough one. I mean, maybe there's an opportunity for the free market to create some sort of like skill-based I think like a boot camp, right? Like I know people, you're trying to switch jobs, you want to get into technology, there's like boot camps. People create boot camps. This is a really micro out there example, but the boot camps are there because you've got a workforce that wants to learn a skill so they can contribute to the new economy. That person still needs to take the initiative to get there. But as long as you have this workforce and these people are hungry and want to work, somebody will create an on-ramp for them to get the skills to contribute to the new economy. That's the hopeful thought. I think that's a little wishful thinking, but
such a level of coddling that exists in these people's minds that it's just two different realities.
Kind of like psychologically, fear is a bigger motivator than gain. And these people have had their job, which is gain, and it's been very, let's just fly with this, a little easy or whatnot. But now the job's taken away. You're actually deeply psychologically more incentivized to avoid pain, and you'll do what you can to avoid pain. And I think it's just going to like root human. Now, is there going to be a lot of casualties as a part of that? Yes, but
I think
just go back to base psychology.
Greg, I think he does raise a good point that the left has done a better job of thinking about how can we help these people than maybe the right has historically. And I think Trump has gotten his message through to a lot of the lower middle class people, and that was evident in his landslide victory this time around. But I think you are right. There has to be some thought there. And the first thing that comes to my mind is like obviously the money is broken, right? Which is like why we're in the space we're in, because we're passionate about that. Like we can see like, hey, when you've got a politically connected group of insiders printing money, giving it to all their cronies at the top, they get the first money first, and then they get to lend it out and do all this other shit. They debase the little man, the poor people. We've got this massive wealth inequality, separation that has been occurring. We're witnessing it in real time. You're talking about it. That in my mind all flows back to fixing the money. No person or entity should be able to just artificially print new units and steal from the rest of society. That's my take on that, right? So as long as that's allowed to continue, you're going to see that wealth inequality increase. And I think that's evident if you look at the data, right?
There's an uncomfortable conversation that's not being had.
I'm sorry, Maddie. We have a call with Dominic Frisbee right now.
Oh, right.
Should I just buzz him into the live stream?
Sure, buzz him on in. Buzz him in.
You guys continue.
Can you buzz Dominic in? All right,
see why not.
I didn't know we had to call them right now, but buzz him in.
Hey,
okay.
You're gonna...
Oh, hit the head. I mean, we were jamming.
But what I was saying was there's an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had about the collateral damage of not only abolishing certain federal agencies or federal jobs, but also the technologicalization of certain industries. I mean, if you think about the number one industry in America right now, or the number one job in the job sector, is trucking, driving trucks.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's all talked about the autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucking becoming a thing in the next 20, 30 years.
It's coming. I mean, it's almost here.
What are you going to do with these people?
Yeah.
That's all they've ever known. And I think it hits the nail on the head is what it brings my mind back to is the Luddites. When the Industrial Revolution came about and people were seeing that their factory jobs were being given to machines, there was the impetus to start beating the machines and blaming them. But then at some point, there has to be some sort of transfer.
Throughout history, we've had technological change, and
What happens is
people have
actually
always-
more jobs.
Right, and people have always said there's more jobs, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, it's
concerned.
like when you went from horses to cars. Like, you know, you had somebody taking care of the horses, but now all of a sudden you've got a car and all these unique parts and all these different things.
Right.
Now we've got gasoline and people need to pump the gas, and so
I know-
society has always
I'm
evolved.
worried.
that way.
I'm concerned about saying this, but I am worried that this time is different.
Really?
with respect
Interesting.
with respect to AI.
Hmm.
I've heard this a
And-
lot from a lot of different people.
The other thing I'm concerned about is, look, the folks that are losing their 6-figure software jobs, that those are not going to be replaced with 6-figure jobs. They're going to be replaced with maybe 5-figure landscaping jobs or something else. Those folks have debt. Those folks have mortgages, credit card debts. That the banking system is basically built on this. And so if we start to destroy these higher paying jobs and we have deflation in wages, it's really a threat to the current banking system, the way that the fiat money system is set up. And so governments and banks are not going to allow the destruction of the banking system. They're just going to print more money. And so ultimately,
Buy Bitcoin.
I mean, it's probably how this is, will wind up, being fixed. But displacing these high, before the displacement of labor was blue collar labor. Now we're talking about really for the first time, potentially mass displacement of white collar labor. Lawyers, accountants.
but my job is-
and bankers and software engineers and the like.
But the thing is, so what people come to me, I get a large swath of people who come and say, well, I tried this on Rocket Lawyer, or I tried this on LegalZoom, and I made the document, and then I tried to enforce it, and then I have to fix the fuck ups.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then I start to make money off that. And we've seen it, especially with AI,
Yeah.
where AI, the other day I put in, I need case law regarding this. AI just created these cases.
It
They
just
do
makes
not
shit up.
exist.
Yeah, that was a big thing on this. Some guy
Not exist.
some guy went to court. Some guy lost his he got his license got revoked from the bar because he used AI to generate case law, and the AI hallucinated all these fake cases.
My paralegal, he's in law school, and they're teaching how
Yeah.
to use legal search engines and legal AI
Mhm.
to kind of combat that. And so
Yeah.
I had to go to him because I didn't know anything about it. Right. I'm from the generation where we use books. Right?
Yeah.
And so I see there's a transfer that's occurring both and again, I bring it back to education,
Mhm.
that it's going to have to happen from the ground up. But to your point about where these people are currently, people who are truckers, the people who are in government bureaucracy jobs, what are they going to transfer their skills to is a good question.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the other side of this one. I actively have people that work for me that are using AI now to be way more productive and do way more than they would before.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the caveat, like you said, that this is by no means a panacea. That does hallucinate. It does make mistakes. We're not quite there yet with the AGI. That is coming probably, right? So I think jobs will be displaced, but also there will be more efficient. People will be able to do more with less in a lot of ways. So,
I agree.
and hopefully new jobs will be created.
I live in a college town, and I play on a hockey team with some college guys. And I asked them, he was doing homework, writing a paper as we were driving to a game, and I'm like, "What is it like with AI there?" And so they've got all these rules, regulations, the checks you can do. There's policing it, and so on and so forth. Like, well, these tools are available to everybody, and they're going to become more and more available, and they're going to become more and more and more intelligent.
Mhm.
So, you actually think you should be in a position where you should be teaching people to leverage these tools
That's
because
exactly-
it's available
I'm
to you.
probably gonna have
Why
to
not?
talk to my kids' school about this because they're like, we don't want you using any AI. We don't want.
Right.
It's like,
Like the
I'm telling my kid, like, dude, you need to be using this in everything you do. You need to figure it out. I'm not don't cheat. Don't use it to cheat, but use it to check your work and explain to you why you were wrong. And
'Cause these
a lot of
tools-
these it will save the conversation. So I said, look, if you need to use I want you to use the AI. If there's a problem, I will go to the school and tell him, hey, I told him to do this, and I'll save the conversation. So the output of how he got to the result was look, I will go to bat for you and say hey, I told you to do this, and here it's not cheating. Look, you can follow the conversation of don't write my essay for me, but hey, I wrote this. I told him, he's writing this. I'm like, dude, put it in there and say help me fix any grammar mistakes and explain what I did wrong. So
But
like
to your point, the
yeah.
people who aren't doing that are going to get
are going to be
behind.
left
Yeah,
behind.
yeah,
Exactly.
You're not leveraging the
Yeah.
tools that are
Yeah.
available to you, and thereby you're going to be less efficient.
And you're going to be
Well,
needed. Like I have all my employees. Like you have, like if you work for me, if you do anything, it's like you need to have a company access account to these different, AI tools, Anthropic or ChatGPT or Venice or any of them, right? We use this actively.
Eric Voorhees and Jordan Peterson have some interesting comments on that, and they essentially want to have specialized AI that's trained to act as a tutor. Where
Khan
essentially
Academy is already doing this with
exactly, he was talking about that.
Oh, he was.
Yeah,
Okay.
where it's not,
Yeah.
it's not hallucinating. It's specifically trained on a certain archive of factual information.
Yeah.
Right. So it's tailored to be a personalized tutor essentially,
Mhm.
and in that way, it can be an aid rather than a crutch.
Yeah.
Right? But hey, Dominic Frisby, unfortunately, apparently our call was at 7:30, so we rescheduled for tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All
So
right,
if
no
you
worries.
do want to wrap it up,
How did I not know about this? This
dude, how did I know? John apparently scheduled.
Did
it.
he?
He didn't. Yeah. So it's all.
Was this for the Twitter Spaces?
This is just to discuss the upcoming space tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So this was a last minute thing he did. All right, boys. Well, this has been a hell of a conversation, and I hope you guys come back on Friday. So,
Been great.
yeah, we'll wrap there.